After I warned my wife not to travel with her male boss. My wife texted, "We'll be back on Monday. I'll explain everything later," I replied. Good. My lawyer loves stories. Her calls didn't stop after that. You ever notice how every catastrophic life decision starts with someone you love saying something that sounds completely innocent? Like, "I'm just going to the store real quick," and then they come back 3 hours later with a new haircut, a rescue parrot, and zero explanation. Well, that's exactly the vibe I got when my wife, Lydia, dropped the conversational equivalent of a grenade into our Tuesday night pasta dinner and casually mentioned she was flying out for a team-building conference with her male boss, Derek. Yeah, Derek. The same Derek who spent 6 consecutive months calling me Larry at company barbecues because he thought it was the height of comedic genius. Even after I corrected him roughly 47 times and contemplated getting my name legally tattooed on my forehead just to drive the point home. I laughed when she told me, but it wasn't one of those genuine laughs where your soul feels light and everything's okay with the universe. No, this was the kind of laugh that comes from deep in your gut, the place where all your red flags are stored in alphabetical order, cross-referenced by date and level of concern. This was the "I'm silently updating my life insurance policy and wondering if WebMD has a section on emotional trauma" kind of laugh. The kind of laugh that says, "I heard you. I'm processing this information, and I'm already 3 steps ahead planning my exit strategy while simultaneously hoping I'm just being paranoid." "It's just business, babe," Lydia said, twirling her fork in her carbonara like she was auditioning for a cooking show instead of potentially torpedoing our marriage. She had that tone, you know, the one, where everything sounds reasonable and you're the crazy person for even questioning it. Like I'm supposed to just nod along while my wife books a romantic getaway disguised as corporate synergy with a guy who probably thinks Boundaries is a new streaming service. Sure, I replied, keeping my voice steady even though internally I was conducting a full forensic analysis of every interaction she'd ever had with Derek, including that time he accidentally put his hand on her lower back during the holiday party, and I had to resist the urge to accidentally put my fist through his dental work. Because every marriage needs a trust fall exercise in another city, preferably one with hotel wine, dim lighting, and a distinct lack of spouses. Really strengthens the foundation, I hear. The marriage counselors are all recommending it these days. Chapter 7. How to destroy your relationship in 5 business days or less. She gave me that look. The one that wives perfect over years of marriage. The look that says, "You're being ridiculous," and "I can't believe I have to deal with this," and "Why did I marry someone who thinks critically," all rolled into one expertly crafted expression of exasperation. I know that look intimately. I've seen it when I forgot to take out the trash, when I bought the wrong brand of almond milk, and now, apparently, when I had the audacity to question why my wife needed to spend 3 nights in a luxury hotel with her boss, who has the emotional intelligence of a golden retriever and the professional boundaries of a reality TV star. I warned her, and I want to be clear about this because what happened next is going to sound like I didn't try. I absolutely tried. I sat down, looked her dead in the eyes with the kind of sincerity usually reserved for marriage proposals and terminal diagnoses, and said, "Lydia, don't go if it's not necessary. I'm asking you, as your husband, as someone who supposedly matters in your decision-making process, to really think about whether this trip is worth whatever it might cost us." I wasn't yelling. I wasn't throwing things. I was being the mature, communicative partner that every relationship expert says you're supposed to be. The guy who uses his words and expresses his concerns like a functional adult instead of a caveman with trust issues. She rolled her eyes so hard I'm pretty sure she saw her own brain, which clearly wasn't working at full capacity if she thought this was a good idea. "You're being insecure," she said, like insecurity was this horrible character flaw instead of a completely rational response to sketchy circumstances. Like I was supposed to just hand her a suitcase, wave goodbye from the porch, and go about my week pretending my wife wasn't about to star in her own low-budget drama titled, "What Could Possibly Go Wrong? A Business Trip Story." "I'm not being insecure," I corrected her, stabbing a piece of chicken with more force than was probably necessary. "I'm being observational. There's a difference. Insecure is thinking you're going to cheat because I don't trust you. Observational is noticing that this entire situation has more red flags than a communist parade and wondering why you're so eager to ignore them." Insecure is irrational fear. This is pattern recognition. This is basic risk assessment. This is me using the critical thinking skills that evolution gave me specifically to avoid situations where I end up as the punchline in someone else's story about how they ruined their marriage. She pushed her plate away, which in married people language means this conversation is over and you've lost. She stood up, grabbed her wine glass like it was a trophy for winning an argument she absolutely hadn't won, and said, "I'm going. It's important for my career. You'll just have to trust me." Trust. That word hung in the air like a fart in an elevator, impossible to ignore and making everyone uncomfortable. Trust is what you're supposed to have in a marriage, sure, but trust without verification is just called being naive, and I'd already used up my lifetime supply of naivety back when I believed that working late actually meant working and not building emotional connections with coworkers over shared takeout and complaints about their spouses. Trust is great until it's weaponized, until it becomes this thing that gets thrown in your face every time you dare to question something that any reasonable person would question. That night, after she went to bed early, probably to avoid further conversation or because she needed her beauty sleep for her upcoming performance in the conference that definitely wasn't an affair, I sat in the living room with a beer that tasted like regret and scrolled through my phone looking at pictures from when we first got married. Back when her smiles were genuine and meant for me. Back when business trip meant she actually came home and told me about the boring presentations and complained about the hotel pillows. Back when Derek was just some name she mentioned occasionally and not the third person in our marriage who didn't even have the decency to pay rent or do dishes. I'm not an idiot, despite what this situation might suggest about my judgment in life partners. I know what team building means in corporate speak. It means trust falls and rope courses and those stupid exercises where you're supposed to communicate without talking, all designed to make you bond with your coworkers so you'll work harder and complain less about the soul-crushing meaninglessness of corporate existence. But team building doesn't require luxury hotels. It doesn't require your boss specifically, and it definitely doesn't require the kind of excited energy Lydia was radiating, the kind of energy she used to reserve for our anniversary dinners and surprise weekend getaways, before those became too expensive and not a priority right now. So yeah, I laughed when she told me about the trip. I laughed because the alternative was screaming or crying or both, and I'm trying to maintain some dignity here. I laughed because sometimes that's all you can do when you see the train wreck coming but you're tied to the tracks and nobody's listening to your warnings. I laughed because in that moment, sitting across from my wife who was already mentally checked out and probably planning what lingerie to pack, I realized that this wasn't just about a business trip. This was about respect, or the complete lack thereof. This was about her choosing to do something she knew would hurt me, something she knew would damage us, because whatever she was getting from Derek and this conference was apparently worth more than what we had built together over 7 years of marriage. But sure, Lydia, it's just business. Just like the Titanic was just a boat ride. Just like Hiroshima was just a bad day. Just like this marriage is just a temporary arrangement until something better comes along. I heard you loud and clear, babe. Message received, decoded, and filed away for future reference in the legal proceedings that I'm definitely not already planning in the back of my mind like a chess player who sees checkmate 6 moves ahead. Welcome to Chapter 1 of How My Marriage Became a Cautionary Tale. Spoiler alert, it gets worse before it gets better, but at least the ending is satisfying. Thursday morning arrived with all the enthusiasm of a funeral procession, and I woke up to the sound of Lydia rummaging through our closet like she was preparing for an invasion instead of a 3-day conference that supposedly involved PowerPoint presentations and networking sessions. I'm talking full-scale tactical preparation here, the kind of packing operation that would make military logistics officers weep with envy. She had 3 suitcases spread across our bedroom floor, which seemed excessive considering the email invitation she'd accidentally left open on her laptop specifically said, "Business casual attire, and please pack light." But hey, what do I know about appropriate conference preparation? I've only been to about 15 of them, and I've never once needed an evening gown or that little black dress that still had the price tag attached, the one that cost more than our monthly grocery budget and screamed, "Definitely not for boardroom presentations." The perfume situation alone should have won some kind of award for suspicious behavior. Lydia was pulling out bottles I didn't even know existed in our house, testing them on her wrists like she was preparing for a date with a fragrance sommelier instead of a team-building retreat with Steve from accounting and whatever other poor souls were allegedly attending this corporate bonding experience. There was this one bottle, some French name I couldn't pronounce that probably translated to homewrecker or bad decisions, that she'd received as a Christmas gift from her sister 2 years ago and never once worn. Not for our anniversary, not for my company holiday party, not even for that wedding we went to where she claimed she wanted to look special. But apparently, Derek and the fictional conference committee deserved the premium scent experience. You need 3 pairs of heels for a business conference? I asked from the doorway, watching her carefully wrap them in tissue paper like they were ancient artifacts being transported to a museum instead of shoes that were going to spend most of their time under a conference table or, let's be honest, under a hotel bed. She didn't even look up, just kept methodically folding clothes with the kind of focus usually reserved for surgeons and bomb defusal experts. I like to have options, she said, which is woman speak for, I don't want to explain my choices to you, because we both know this doesn't add up, and I'm hoping you won't press the issue. Options. Right. Because when I go to conferences, I definitely pack my tuxedo, my casual tux, and my backup emergency tuxedo, just in case the team-building activities suddenly turn into the Oscars. The logic was bulletproof, really. Absolutely no holes whatsoever. She had packed 4 new dresses, 2 of which I'd never seen before, which meant she'd gone shopping specifically for this trip and somehow forgot to mention it during our nightly "How was your day?" conversations that had apparently become optional. There was a red number that was so low-cut it needed its own engineering degree, a blue one with a slit up the side that would make a burlesque dancer blush, and 2 others that fell into the category of why bother wearing anything at all. But sure, these were definitely appropriate for trust falls and strategic planning sessions. Maybe they were planning to build trust by seeing how much fabric they could remove before HR got involved. The real kicker, the detail that really sold the whole charade, was when I noticed she'd packed her hair curler and straightener, both plugged in and ready to go, along with enough hair products to open a small salon. But her work laptop was still sitting on the kitchen counter next to yesterday's coffee mug, completely forgotten like an afterthought or that one coworker nobody invites to lunch. When I pointed this out, helpfully carrying it to the bedroom like the supportive husband I was clearly failing to be, she waved me off. "Oh, I'll just use my tablet," she said. "Derek's bringing the presentation files on a shared drive anyway." Derek's bringing them. Of course he is. Because what's a business trip without being completely dependent on your boss for all your work materials? It's not like she could access files independently or bring her own equipment like a professional adult. No, much better to be tethered to Derek and his shared drive, probably sharing a lot more than just PowerPoint slides and quarterly projections. She kissed me goodbye at the door with all the passion and sincerity of someone signing a legal document they hadn't read. That quick peck that's more about obligation than affection. The kind of kiss that says, "This is what married people do," rather than, "I'm going to miss you." It was the emotional equivalent of a participation trophy, technically meeting the minimum requirement while putting in 0 actual effort. Her lips touched mine for approximately 0.5 seconds before she pulled away, already mentally checked out and probably running through her packing list one more time to make sure she hadn't forgotten the lingerie I definitely saw tucked into the side pocket of her carry-on. "Be safe," I said, because what else do you say to someone who's about to walk out the door and potentially out of your marriage? Have fun at your very real and legitimate business conference that definitely exists and isn't just an excuse for something I'm going to regret not preventing. Okay, I didn't say that last part out loud, but my tone said it for me. My tone was doing all kinds of heavy lifting that morning, carrying the weight of suspicion, disappointment, and the growing realization that I was married to someone who thought I was either stupid or blind, possibly both. "I'll text when I land," she said, which in retrospect was the first lie of many, though I didn't know it yet. At the time, I took her at her word like an idiot, like someone who still believed that marriage vows meant something, and "I'll text you" wasn't just verbal filler designed to get her out the door faster. She grabbed her suitcases, all 3 of them, and rolled them down the driveway to her Uber like she was leaving for a month-long expedition to Antarctica instead of a 3-day conference 2 states over. The Uber driver, a middle-aged guy with kind eyes who probably had his own marriage problems, helped her load everything into the trunk while I stood in the doorway like a chump, waving goodbye to my wife and my dignity simultaneously. She didn't text when she landed. Shocker, I know. 4 hours passed, which was plenty of time for her flight, landing, baggage claim, and hotel check-in, plus enough buffer time to account for traffic, bathroom breaks, and stopping for a celebratory cocktail at the airport bar. But my phone stayed silent except for a spam call about my car's extended warranty and a notification that our credit card bill was due, which felt ominously appropriate given what was probably happening to our joint finances at that very moment. So I did what any reasonable person with a smartphone and a growing sense of dread would do. I tracked her flight. Not because I'm some controlling psychopath who needs to monitor his wife's every movement, but because Google exists, flight tracking apps are free, and I love a good plot twist almost as much as I love being proven right about my suspicions. The flight had landed on time at 2:47 p.m. It was now 7:30 p.m. The math wasn't mathing, as the kids say these days. Or maybe that's already outdated slang, because I'm apparently too old and married to keep up with cultural trends or recognize when my wife is lying to my face. I checked her location on Find My Friends, that app we'd set up years ago for safety purposes that had now become my window into discovering exactly how unsafe my marriage was. She was at the Grand Riviera Hotel, which I immediately Googled because I'm thorough like that, and also because I enjoy torturing myself with evidence of my own naivety. 5 stars. Rooftop bar with city views. Spa services. In-room jacuzzis. And here's the really fun part. The company handbook, which I'd read exactly once during a bout of insomnia last year, specifically states that business travel accommodations should be reasonable and cost-effective, not exceeding business class standards. This hotel had suites that cost more per night than I made in a week. This was the kind of place you took your mistress, not your management team. Meanwhile, back in reality where I apparently lived alone now, I was sitting in our kitchen eating leftover spaghetti straight from the Tupperware container like a widowed raccoon who'd given up on dignity and proper dinnerware. I didn't even heat it up. Just sat there in the growing darkness, lit only by the refrigerator light and my phone screen, shoveling cold pasta into my mouth while wondering at what exact moment I'd married a woman who apparently had a secret minor in infidelity and a major in creative excuses. The spaghetti tasted like betrayal and oregano, which is a flavor combination I wouldn't recommend to anyone going through a potential marital crisis. Our dog, Max, a golden retriever who usually lost his mind with excitement whenever Lydia came home, just looked at me with those knowing eyes that dogs have, the ones that say, "I could have told you this was coming, but you don't speak dog, and also I'm more interested in whether you're going to finish that spaghetti." Even the dog knew something was off. Even the dog could sense that the pack dynamics had shifted, that alpha female had abandoned the den for shinier territory and better-smelling males who probably gave her treats and told her she deserved more than a husband who remembered anniversaries and did half the housework. I poured myself a whiskey, the good stuff we'd been saving for special occasions, and decided that discovering your wife's true priorities definitely qualified as special, if not particularly joyous. The bottle was a gift from my father, given to me on our wedding day with the advice to save it for when you really need it. Dad always was perceptive. He'd met Lydia exactly 3 times before giving me that bottle, and now I wondered if he'd seen something I'd missed, some fundamental incompatibility or character flaw that I'd been too in love or too stupid to recognize. When exactly had I married a motivational speaker for corporate affairs? When had my wife transformed from the woman who used to text me throughout the day just to say she missed me into someone who couldn't be bothered to send a single message confirming she'd arrived safely? These were the questions keeping me company along with my cold spaghetti and expensive whiskey, in a house that suddenly felt too big and too empty, with a marriage that was clearly smaller and more fragile than I'd ever wanted to admit. By the second day of Lydia's conference, I'd officially entered what I like to call the ghosting Olympics, where my wife was going for gold in the "how long can you ignore your husband" event and absolutely crushing the competition, which in this case was non-existent because apparently I was the only idiot participating. Friday morning rolled around, and I woke up to a grand total of 0 messages from my beloved spouse, which was particularly impressive considering she'd promised to stay in touch and keep me updated before she left. I guess those promises had the same shelf life as gas station sushi, expired before they even got started. I sent my first text around 8 in the morning, right after my coffee and right before my existential crisis really kicked into high gear. How's the conference? Simple, straightforward, the kind of message that doesn't sound accusatory or needy. Just a concerned husband checking in on his wife who was supposedly in a different state learning about quarterly projections and synergistic team dynamics, or whatever corporate buzzwords they were pretending to care about. I watched the little delivered notification pop up, watched it sit there like a tombstone marking the death of prompt communication, and went about my day trying not to check my phone every 45 seconds like some kind of anxious teenager waiting for his crush to notice him. 7 hours later, right around 3 in the afternoon when I was seriously considering filing a missing person report or at least a missing spouse report with the Better Business Bureau, my phone finally buzzed with her response. 7 hours to respond to a forward question. I've had slower responses from customer service chatbots and government agencies. Crazy schedule. Her text read, like that explained the communication blackout. Barely sleeping. Miss you though, red heart. And there it was, the heart emoji, deployed like a tactical weapon designed to neutralize suspicion and make me feel guilty for even questioning her radio silence. The heart emoji, that little piece of digital emotional manipulation that's supposed to make everything okay, supposed to convince me that someone who can't be bothered to send a text for 7 hours definitely still loves me and isn't currently involved in activities that would violate our marriage contract. Yeah, because when you genuinely miss someone, when you're lying awake at night thinking about your partner and wishing they were there, you definitely express those deep feelings through a mass-produced cartoon heart that requires zero effort and even less sincerity. It's the emotional equivalent of those thoughts and prayers, posts people make after tragedies, technically acknowledging the situation while doing absolutely nothing of substance. That heart emoji was a coupon for affection, a discount version of actual love that she could slap onto any message to make it seem like she cared while putting in minimal emotional labor. I didn't respond immediately because I was busy doing some investigative journalism that would make Watergate reporters proud. See, what Lydia apparently forgot in her haste to pack 17 dresses and 0 work equipment was that we live in the age of social media, where people document every single moment of their lives like they're creating evidence for future historians studying the decline of Western civilization. If there really was a conference happening, if there really were team-building activities and professional development sessions, then surely someone would be posting about it. Surely the company's official social media accounts would have photos, updates, maybe some inspirational quotes over stock images of people in business suits high-fiving or whatever passes for corporate content these days. So I started scrolling, and boy, did I find something. Nina Chun, Lydia's co-worker and the office gossip who could probably run TMZ if she ever left the corporate world, had been posting up a storm. And I mean a literal storm of content, the kind of posting frequency that suggested she was definitely not sitting through boring presentations or participating in trust falls. Her Instagram was a highlight reel of poolside selfies, sunset cocktails, and what appeared to be a very relaxed interpretation of business casual that involved bikinis and sunglasses that cost more than my car payment. The photos were tagged #company-retreat and #team-fun, which already sounded less like professional development and more like a vacation someone else was paying for. But here's what really got me. I scrolled through every single photo Nina posted, and I'm talking dozens of them because the woman had apparently decided to become an influencer for the weekend. Beach shots, pool shots, restaurant shots, bar shots, enough content to fill a travel brochure. And in all of those photos, all of those carefully curated moments documenting the team-building experience, I didn't see my wife once. Not a single appearance. Not even a blurry background cameo. It was like Lydia had decided to opt out of social media documentation entirely, which was weird considering she usually posted everything from her morning coffee to her afternoon snack, like she was creating a visual diary for people who didn't ask to see it. But you know who I did see? Derek. Good old Derek, my wife's boss. The man who'd spent half a year calling me the wrong name like it was a bit he was committed to. There he was in Nina's photos, shirtless and proud of it, showing off a dad bod that suggested his gym membership was purely theoretical. He was holding 2 glasses of wine in one photo, standing by the pool with what I can only describe as the confidence of a man who thought he was God's gift to middle management. 2 glasses of wine. 2. And unless Derek had developed the ability to drink ambidextrously or had suddenly taken up juggling as a hobby, that second glass was meant for someone. Someone who wasn't appearing in photos. Someone who was apparently too busy being barely sleeping to participate in social media documentation. The math was mateing now, and I didn't like what it was adding up to. My wife was at a luxury resort. Her boss was holding 2 wine glasses, and neither of them were appearing in the official team photos. Meanwhile, the actual team was out by the pool having documented fun while my wife and her boss were doing. What exactly? Having a very private, very intense discussion about quarterly earnings? Reviewing performance metrics in complete isolation? Engaging in some kind of advanced team-building exercise that required absolute secrecy and double the wine? I made a mental note right then and there, sitting on my couch with my phone in one hand and what remained of my sanity in the other. Next time Lydia says team building, I'm buying her a hammer, some nails, and a stack of lumber, and she can build an actual treehouse in the backyard. At least then the only thing getting screwed would be the wooden planks, and I'd have something tangible to show for the investment of time and money instead of just mounting credit card bills and disappearing dignity. I spent the rest of Friday doing what any rational person would do in my situation. I became a detective. Not the cool kind from movies who solve crimes and look good in trench coats, but the sad kind who sits at home in sweatpants analyzing Instagram posts like they're ancient hieroglyphics containing the secrets of the universe. I checked Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, because apparently I thought maybe my wife and her boss were updating their professional networks between romantic interludes, and every other social platform I could think of. I even checked TikTok, despite being 37 years old and having no idea how that app works beyond knowing it's somehow both 3 seconds and 3 hours long, depending on how you use it. The pattern was consistent. Lots of documentation of the team having fun, 0 documentation of Lydia or Derek participating in said fun, and an increasingly clear picture of what was probably happening when people decided not to appear in photos together. It's like they'd read a handbook on how to have an affair and followed the chapter on digital footprint management a little too carefully. Don't post together. Don't tag each other. Maintain plausible deniability. The only thing missing was a burner phone and a fake mustache. I texted her again that evening, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment and also because some small, stupid part of me wanted to give her a chance to prove me wrong. Saw Nina's posts. Looks like everyone's having fun. Where are you in all the photos? It was a test, a gentle one, phrased like curiosity instead of accusation. I watched that message sit on delivered for another 3 hours before she responded with, been in meetings most of the day. Just finished dinner. Dinner. Right. Dinner that took 3 hours to eat and apparently required her phone to be surgically removed from her hand because, God forbid, she check her messages between courses. That night, I poured another whiskey. The special occasion bottle was getting a serious workout and sat in our living room that felt more like a mausoleum than a home, thinking about all the times I'd been the idiot who believed the easy lie instead of trusting my gut. Every working late excuse I'd accepted. Every it's just lunch with coworkers explanation I'd nodded along with. Every time Derek's name had come up in conversation and I'd pushed down that weird feeling in my stomach because surely I was being paranoid. Surely my wife wouldn't be that cliche. Surely I was worth more than being the punchline in someone else's midlife crisis story. Max wandered over and put his head on my knee, which is what dogs do when they sense their human is having what therapists call a moment. I scratched behind his ears and wondered if I should have been a dog person exclusively, if maybe limiting my trust to animals who literally couldn't betray me beyond occasionally eating my shoes was the smarter life choice. At least dogs are honest about their motivations. They want food, walks, and belly rubs, and they don't pretend it's about career development or networking opportunities. If suspicion burned calories, I'd have had abs that would make fitness models weep with envy. I'd have been shredded, absolutely jacked from the sheer metabolic energy of constantly analyzing every text message, every social media post, every gap in communication. I'd have looked like I trained for the Olympics instead of just competing in the emotional Olympics where the only prize was the knowledge that I'd been right to be worried and the participation trophy was crippling trust issues for future relationships. But I didn't confront her yet. I wanted receipts, not drama. I wanted evidence that would hold up in court, metaphorical or otherwise. I wanted to be absolutely, unquestionably certain before I pulled the trigger on whatever needed to happen next. Because once you accuse someone of something like this, you can't take it back. Once you say, I think you're cheating, the marriage either survives and becomes stronger or it dies right there on the spot. And I wasn't ready to kill it yet. Not until I had proof. Not until I could look myself in the mirror and know beyond any doubt that I'd done everything right and she'd done everything wrong. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of cruel sunshine that makes you want to punch the weather in its stupid, optimistic face. All bright and cheerful like the universe hadn't gotten the memo that my life was currently circling the drain. I woke up to my phone ringing at 7:30 in the morning, which is universally recognized as an ungodly hour on the weekend and should be illegal except in cases of emergencies or lottery winnings. It was Lydia calling, and for a brief, stupid moment, my heart did that hopeful thing where it thinks maybe everything's fine. Maybe she's calling to apologize. Maybe she's realized the error of her ways and is coming home early to throw herself at my mercy and beg forgiveness. Yeah, no, that's not what happened. Hey babe, she said, her voice all business casual, like she was calling to confirm a dentist appointment instead of checking in with the husband she'd been systematically ignoring for 48 hours. There was background noise, the kind you hear in hotel lobbies with their fountains and elevator music and the general ambience of people having better days than you. Can't talk long. Derek's presenting tomorrow, and we need to prep. Derek's presenting. Derek's presenting tomorrow. Let that sentence marinate for a second. Really let it sink in and ferment into the pile of bullshit it so clearly was. It was Saturday. The presentation was allegedly on Sunday, which meant they still had a full day. Yet somehow this required immediate attention at 7:30 in the morning when normal people who weren't involved in suspicious activities were sleeping off their Friday night wine and contemplating whether pancakes or waffles were the better breakfast choice. Presenting what exactly? I asked, keeping my voice level even though internally I was screaming into the void. His midlife crisis? Because I've got to say, that's been pretty well documented already. Maybe he could use some of Nina's Instagram photos as visual aids. Really drive home the point about authentic leadership or whatever corporate nonsense you people pretend to care about. She laughed, but it was that nervous laugh people do when they've been caught, but haven't fully committed to the lie yet. That weird sound that's half genuine amusement and half, oh shit, he's onto me. It was the audio equivalent of someone sweating through their shirt during a polygraph test. You're funny, she said, which is what people say when you're not being funny at all, but they need to fill the silence with something other than the truth. Look, I really have to go. We'll talk more when I get back. And then she hung up. Just like that. Didn't wait for me to respond. Didn't ask how I was doing. Didn't inquire about Max or the house, or whether I'd burned the place down in a fit of justified rage. Just hung up like I was a telemarketer she'd been too polite to dismiss earlier. I stared at my phone screen, at her contact photo from 2 years ago when we'd gone to that beach resort for our anniversary, and she'd looked at me like I was the only person in the world who mattered, and I wondered when exactly that woman had been replaced by this stranger who couldn't even spare 5 minutes for her husband, but apparently had unlimited time for Derek and his presentation needs. That night, I made a decision. Actually, several decisions, all of them powered by spite and expensive whiskey, which is honestly the best decision-making fuel known to man. I decided I was done playing the waiting game, done sitting at home like a loyal dog hoping his owner would remember to come back and feed him. I cooked myself a steak, a good one, the kind we usually save for special occasions or when Lydia wanted to celebrate something at work. Medium rare, perfectly seasoned, with garlic butter melting over the top like liquid gold. I made roasted potatoes, asparagus with Parmesan, the whole production. I set the table for one, used the good plates we'd gotten as wedding gifts and had barely touched because apparently we were saving them for company that never came or occasions that never felt special enough. I poured whiskey for two, though, because I'm petty like that, and also because the symbolism felt right. 1 glass for me, 1 glass for the ghost of my marriage, both of us drinking to the inevitable conclusion of this shit show. I raised my glass to the empty chair across from me and toasted to my own sanity, to the part of my brain that had been screaming warnings since Tuesday and was finally being validated, to the future version of myself who who would look back on this moment and hopefully laugh instead of cry. The steak was perfect. The whiskey was smooth. The company was terrible, but at least it was honest. Max sat next to me, eyeing the meat with the kind of focused intensity that dogs reserve for food and squirrels, and I slipped him a piece because at least somebody in this house appreciated my efforts and didn't lie about where they were spending their nights. If suspicion burned calories, I'd have had abs by then. The kind of abs you see on fitness magazine covers with headlines like, "This one weird trick doctors hate." I'd have been absolutely shredded, totally jacked, with a physique that would make Greek statues jealous. Every anxious thought, every analyzed text message, every moment spent wondering what my wife was doing and who she was doing it with. All of that nervous energy would have transformed into pure muscle. I'd have been a specimen, a marvel of human anatomy powered entirely by emotional turmoil and justified paranoia. But I wasn't confronting her yet. That was the important part, the detail that separated me from every angry husband in every bad movie who goes off half-cocked and ends up looking like the crazy one. I wanted receipts. I wanted documentation. I wanted evidence that would hold up in court, in divorce proceedings, in the court of public opinion when our friends inevitably asked what happened and why Lydia was suddenly single and I was mysteriously unbothered by the whole thing. I wanted proof so ironclad that even her mother, who'd never particularly liked me and made it clear at every family gathering that her daughter could have done better, would have to admit that her precious Lydia had screwed up spectacularly. So I did what any rational person in the digital age would do. I quietly checked our joint credit card statement. Not secretly, mind you, because it was my card too, my name on the account, my legal right to see where our money was being spent. I logged into the account on my laptop, poured myself another whiskey because this felt like a moment that required liquid courage, and started scrolling through the charges from the past 2 days. Oh boy. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. If I'd had any doubts before, any lingering hope that maybe I was wrong and my wife really was at a legitimate business conference doing legitimate business things, those doubts evaporated faster than water on a hot sidewalk. The charges didn't just suggest vacation. They screamed it. They got a megaphone and announced it to the world. They took out a billboard advertisement declaring, "This is not a business trip, you absolute moron." Friday night, 7:45 p.m. The Skyline Rooftop Restaurant, $347. For 2 people, because the itemized receipt showed 2 entrees, 2 appetizers, a bottle of wine that cost more than my monthly car payment, and dessert. Business dinner? Sure, if your business is romance and your quarterly projections involve seeing how much money you can spend while destroying your marriage. Saturday morning, 9:15 a.m., Serenity Spa and Wellness Center, $412. For a couples massage. A couples massage. The charge literally said couples relaxation package, right there in the description, like they weren't even trying to hide it anymore, like they decided subtlety was overrated and might as well go full rom-com montage with the betrayal. Saturday afternoon, 2:30 p.m., room service. The Grand Riviera Hotel, room 847. $193. For what, I wondered? What could possibly cost almost $200 from room service? I pulled up the hotel's room service menu online because I'm thorough like that and discovered it was champagne, chocolate-covered strawberries, and what the menu described as a romantic charcuterie board for 2. Romantic. They used that word. In the description of the room service my wife ordered with her boss, using our joint credit card, while I was at home eating leftover spaghetti like a divorced raccoon. There were more charges. So many more. Boutique shopping at the hotel gift shop, probably buying more lingerie because apparently the suitcase full wasn't enough. Cocktails at the lobby bar. Late-night dessert at some French patisserie. Each charge was a nail in the coffin of our marriage. Each receipt a little piece of evidence that I carefully screenshotted and saved to a folder on my desktop labeled receipts, because I'm not creative under stress, but I am organized. That's when I knew. That's when the last little piece of doubt, that tiny voice that had been saying, "Maybe there's an explanation, maybe you're reading too much into this," finally shut up and accepted reality. My wife's business trip wasn't about business. It never had been. This was a vacation, a romantic getaway, a fair sampler platter funded by our joint checking account. This was Derek shooting his shot and Lydia not just catching it, but running with it all the way to the end zone, while I sat at home cheering for a team that didn't exist. I leaned back in my chair, stared at my laptop screen with all those charges lined up like evidence in a crime scene, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet. That would come later. Right now. It was something calmer, something almost peaceful. It was clarity. It was certainty. It was the kind of understanding that comes when all the puzzle pieces finally click into place, and you see the full picture even though you wish you couldn't. My wife's business trip was about to become a career change, all right. A career change from married woman to defendant in divorce proceedings. From trusted partner to cautionary tale I tell at dinner parties. From love of my life to biggest mistake I ever made, and somehow also the best lesson I ever learned. I closed the laptop, finished my whiskey, and went to bed with a smile on my face. Not a happy smile, but the kind of smile you get when you know something nobody else knows yet, when you're holding cards in a game everyone thinks you're losing. I slept like a baby that night, the kind of sleep that comes from finally having enough evidence to stop questioning your sanity and start questioning your lawyer about retainer fees. Tomorrow was Sunday. Tomorrow she'd be flying back with more lies and excuses. Tomorrow the real fun would begin. But tonight I was at peace, wrapped in certainty and high thread count sheets, dreaming about a future that didn't include wondering where my wife was, or who she was with, or whether that heart emoji actually meant anything at all. Sunday morning came with a text message that should go down in history as one of the worst crafted lies ever committed to digital format. Right up there with the check is in the mail, and I totally read the terms and conditions. I was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee that tasted like victory and spite in equal measures, when my phone buzzed with Lydia's message at exactly 9:37 a.m. I knew the exact time because I screenshot it immediately, adding it to my growing collection of evidence that would make prosecutors weep with joy. Hey babe, don't worry. Traveling for a few more days. Back Monday. I'll explain everything later. I read it once, then twice, then a third time because surely I'd misunderstood something. Surely my wife hadn't just casually extended her 3-day business trip without asking, without discussing, without even pretending this was a mutual decision between two adults who were supposedly equal partners in a marriage. Don't worry, she said, like worry was the issue here and not the fact that she'd just unilaterally decided to spend more time away from home, more time with Derek, more time charging romantic dinners and couples massages to our credit card while I sat here wondering if I should change the locks or just burn the whole house down for the insurance money. Traveling for a few more days. Not the conference got extended. Not my boss needs me to stay for additional meetings. Just traveling. Like she was some free spirit backpacking through Europe instead of a married woman who'd apparently forgotten that marriage involves communication and consent and not just doing whatever the hell you want because you feel like it. And that sign-off, that beautiful piece of manipulation. I'll explain everything later. Later. The universal word people use when they don't have a good explanation now and are hoping you'll either forget to ask or they'll have time to craft a believable lie. I stared at that text message like it was a work of art, a masterpiece of terrible decision-making and worse communication skills. This was it. This was the moment where I could either continue being the understanding husband who waited patiently for explanations that would never come, or I could be the guy who finally grew a spine and called bullshit on the whole operation. Guess which option I chose? I smiled, and it wasn't one of those sad smiles or nervous smiles or even angry smiles. This was pure, unfiltered satisfaction, the kind of smile you get when you're about to deploy a nuke and you know the target has no idea it's coming. My fingers moved across the keyboard with the kind of purpose usually reserved for writing resignation letters or final exam essays, crafting a response that was only 7 words long but carried the weight of an encyclopedia of disappointment. Good. My lawyer loves stories. Send. And just like that, peace entered my soul like a goddamn dove carrying an olive branch made of justice and self-respect. I watched the message change from sending to delivered to read in the span of about 10 seconds, which told me everything I needed to know about how closely Lydia was monitoring her phone despite being so busy with her extended business traveling that she couldn't possibly communicate like a normal human being. The response was immediate. And by immediate, I mean 5 minutes later her phone started ringing with the kind of desperation usually reserved for people calling 911 or trying to reach their drug dealer. One call. Then 3 more in rapid succession. Then 12, because apparently Lydia had forgotten that you can't call someone into compliance, that you can't dial away the consequences of your actions like you're ordering pizza. Each call I ignored brought me more joy than the last. A little burst of serotonin every time my phone screen lit up with her contact photo, and I swiped it away like I was playing the world's most satisfying mobile game. When the calls didn't work, she switched to texts, because nothing says, "I respect you in our marriage," like harassment via multiple communication platforms. "What does that mean?" she wrote, like the sentence "my lawyer loves stories" was some kind of ancient riddle requiring a PhD in linguistics to decode. Like there was any ambiguity whatsoever in what I'd just said. Like lawyer was a word with multiple meanings, and she couldn't quite figure out which one I was referring to. I took my time responding, made myself another coffee, fed Max, who was probably the only family member who deserved my attention at this point, and then finally typed back with the kind of casual energy you use when discussing the weather or what's for dinner. Exactly what it sounds like, sweetheart. This sweetheart was a nice touch, I thought. That little sprinkle of passive-aggressive affection that really drove home how absolutely done I was with this entire situation. It's amazing how fast people find Wi-Fi when their secrets get signal strength. Suddenly the woman who'd been barely sleeping and so busy had all the time in the world to blow up my phone like it was New Year's Eve, and she was the fireworks display. More calls came through, each one more desperate than the last. Each one getting declined with the kind of satisfaction that really should be illegal because it felt too good to be morally acceptable. She tried calling from Derek's phone, which I knew because his contact info popped up, and I'd never been more tempted to answer, just to ask him how it felt to be complicit in the destruction of a marriage and whether he thought his PowerPoint presentation was worth it. But I didn't answer that either, because Derek didn't deserve my voice or my time or anything except maybe a strongly worded Yelp review of his character. The texts kept coming. "Mark, please." Then, "We need to talk." Then, "You're being unreasonable." That last one made me laugh so hard I almost spit out my coffee. I was being unreasonable. Me. The guy who'd stayed home like a loyal husband while his wife gallivanted around a luxury resort with her boss on the company dime and our joint credit card. I was the unreasonable one. The mental gymnastics required to reach that conclusion deserved an Olympic medal. My phone was basically having a seizure at this point, vibrating so much it was moving across the kitchen counter like it was trying to escape the sheer volume of panic emanating from Lydia's end of the digital conversation. But I just sat there, sipping my coffee, occasionally reaching over to decline another call, feeling more at peace than I had in months. Maybe years. Maybe ever since I'd said, "I do," to a woman who apparently heard, "I might," depending on better offers. This was it. The fire had started, and I hadn't even needed to light the match. Lydia had done all the work herself, built the pyre out of lies and bad decisions and couples massages, soaked it in champagne and room service charges, and all I'd done was send one text message and watch it all go up in flames. Beautiful, cleansing, absolutely justified flames that burned away 7 years of marriage and left nothing but clarity in their wake. Monday morning, I walked into the law offices of Mendoza and Associates with the kind of purpose you usually see in movie montages right before the protagonist destroys their enemies and claims victory. The office was on the 3rd floor of a building downtown that smelled like expensive leather and broken promises, which felt appropriate for a place where marriages came to die and assets got divided like nobody ever loved each other in the first place. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain and the kind of knowing look that suggested she'd seen this exact scenario play out 1,000 times, smiled sympathetically when I told her I had an appointment with Grace Mendoza. "She's expecting you, Mr. Harrison. Second door on the left." Grace Mendoza was exactly the kind of lawyer you want when your life is imploding and you need someone who can slice through bullshit with surgical precision. She was in her early 40s, dressed in a power suit that probably cost more than my car, with dark hair pulled back in a bun so tight it looked like it meant business all by itself. Her office was immaculate, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with legal text that I'm sure she'd actually read, a desk made of some kind of wood that screamed, "I win cases, and I'm not sorry about it," and diplomas from universities that made my community college degree feel like a participation trophy. She stood up when I entered, shook my hand with a grip that could probably crush walnuts, and gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs across from her desk. "Mr. Harrison, I understand you're having some marital difficulties." The way she said it, so matter-of-fact and professional, made the whole nightmare feel manageable somehow, like this was just another problem with a solution rather than the complete destruction of everything I'd built over 7 years. "That's putting it mildly," I said, pulling out my phone and opening the folder I'd labeled Receipts, which now contained enough screenshots and documented evidence to fill a small novel. "My wife went on a business trip with her boss. Except it wasn't really a business trip, it was more like a romantic vacation funded by our joint credit card. And now she's extended it without asking because apparently our marriage operates on a unilateral decision-making model I wasn't informed about." I handed her my phone and watched as Grace scrolled through the evidence with the kind of focused attention that made me understand why her hourly rate was probably going to require me to take out a small loan. She looked at the text messages, the credit card statements, the social media posts from Nina that showed everyone except my wife, the charges for couples massages and romantic dinners and champagne that cost more than I made in a day. Her expression didn't change, professionally neutral, but I saw her eyebrow raise about 1/4 of an inch when she got to the $400 spa package. "So she's mixing work and pleasure," Grace said, not even bothering to make it a question because the evidence was pretty damn clear at this point. "Mostly pleasure," I replied, leaning back in my chair with the kind of exhausted satisfaction that comes from finally having someone else validate that you're not crazy, that your concerns are legitimate, that the situation is exactly as messed up as you think it is. "The work seems voluntary, optional, more like a cover story than an actual job responsibility. I'm pretty sure Derek's quarterly presentation could have been prepared via email and Zoom calls like every other normal company does, but apparently they needed to do it poolside with wine." Grace actually smirked at that, a tiny crack in her professional demeanor that told me she'd heard variations of this story before and had probably stopped being surprised by human stupidity somewhere around her 3rd year of practice. She handed my phone back and leaned forward, elbows on her desk, fingers steepled in that way lawyers do when they're about to tell you something important. "So what are we going for here, Mr. Harrison? Do you want this clean or loud? Do you want a quiet divorce with minimal drama? Or do you want to make a statement? Because I can do either, but the approach changes everything." I didn't even have to think about it. "Clean," I said immediately. "No shouting, no scandal, no dramatic confrontations that end up on social media or at family dinners for the next 20 years. Just legal poetry. Just clean, efficient, undeniable paperwork that makes it very clear who screwed up and who's walking away with their dignity intact." Grace nodded like I'd passed some kind of test, like I'd given the right answer that would make her job easier and my life better. "Smart choice. Loud is satisfying in the moment, but expensive in the long run. And trust me, you don't want to spend the next 5 years in court battles over who gets the coffee maker. We'll file for divorce on grounds of adultery with the evidence you've provided. In this state, that affects asset division. You've got documentation, timestamps, financial records. This is about as clean as these things get from an evidence standpoint." She started typing on her computer, pulling up forms and documents with the kind of efficiency that made it clear she'd done this so many times she could probably do it in her sleep. "We'll need to move quickly while the evidence is fresh and before she has time to craft a narrative or hide additional assets. I'll have the papers drawn up by end of business today. How do you want to handle service? You can have a process server deliver them, or we can arrange for her to be served in a more private setting if you prefer." "Whatever's fastest and most official," I said. I'm done being considerate of her feelings when she clearly hasn't been considerate of mine. She extended her vacation with her boss without asking. She can receive divorce papers without a courtesy warning. Seems fair to me. By the time I left Grace's office an hour later, the wheels were in motion. Papers were being prepared. A strategy was being formulated. My financial assets were being protected. Everything was happening with the kind of professional efficiency that made me wish I'd called a lawyer 3 days ago instead of spending the weekend spiraling into whiskey and detective work, though admittedly the detective work had been necessary to build the case that was now being assembled with terrifying precision. I stopped at a bakery on the way home because spite and sugar go together like peanut butter and jelly, like coffee and mornings, like adultery and divorce proceedings. I ordered a dozen cupcakes, custom decorated with little messages written in frosting. The baker, a cheerful woman in her 20s who was way too happy for someone working with buttercream at 10 in the morning, asked what I wanted them to say. Can you write best wishes, Derek, on half of them and congratulations on your freedom on the other half? I asked, sliding my credit card across the counter. She paused, looked at me with eyes that suddenly understood this wasn't a celebration in the traditional sense, and smiled knowingly. Rough day. Rough weekend, I corrected. But it's getting better by the hour. I left with a pink box full of passive-aggressive baked goods and a lawyer who was probably already drafting the kind of legal documents that would make Lydia regret every decision she'd made since Thursday morning. Grace Mendoza deserved a tip, maybe a bonus, possibly a statue erected in her honor for being the kind of professional who could take your worst day and turn it into a strategic victory. If I had to pay her hourly rate for the next few months, it would be worth every penny just to know that someone with her level of competence and ruthless efficiency was on my side. Nothing says closure quite like cupcakes that say best wishes to the man who helped destroy your marriage, and nothing says, I'm winning this divorce, quite like having Grace Mendoza in your corner with a folder full of evidence and a law degree she clearly knew how to use. While Lydia was out networking and building her career through methods that would definitely violate the employee handbook if anyone actually cared to enforce it, I decided to rebrand our marriage into what it should have been all along: a solo enterprise with clear boundaries and zero tolerance for bullshit. Monday afternoon, armed with Grace's legal advice, a hardware store receipt, and a level of petty determination that would make reality TV producers weep with joy, I began what I now refer to as the Great Lockout rebrand of 2025. First order of business, I boxed up Lydia's things. Not hastily, not in anger, but with the kind of methodical care you'd use when packing museum artifacts or dismantling a bomb. I folded every piece of clothing she'd left behind, organized her shoes by color and heel height because I'm not a monster, and carefully wrapped her collection of decorative candles that she'd never once lit because they were too pretty to burn, which in retrospect was a perfect metaphor for our marriage. Too pretty to actually use, just there for show, gathering dust while pretending to serve a purpose. I packed her toiletries, her makeup collection that required its own zip code, her 17 bottles of nail polish in shades that all looked identical to my colorblind eyes, and that stupid diffuser she'd bought from some Instagram influencer that was supposed to promote wellness, but mostly just made our bedroom smell like a yoga studio had exploded. Every item went into boxes labeled with blue painter's tape and a Sharpie, each one marked Career Growth Package. Return to sender, because I'm petty, but I'm also creative about it. Her books went into one box, the self-help titles about finding your authentic self and embracing your power stacked neatly on top of the romance novels she'd read poolside last summer, back when I thought we were still happy and not just pretending for the Instagram photos. Her craft supplies that she'd bought during her brief "I'm going to start an Etsy shop" phase went into another box, the unopened packages of scrapbooking materials serving as a monument to abandoned dreams and unfinished projects, much like our marriage. I even packed her collection of coffee mugs, the ones with inspirational quotes like "Boss Babe," and "She believed she could, so she did," which felt ironic now considering what she'd done was cheat on her husband and make terrible life choices. Those mugs went into a box with extra bubble wrap because despite everything, I wasn't trying to cost her money in broken ceramics. I was trying to cost her a marriage, not dishware. The photos came down next. Our wedding picture from the mantle, the one where we both looked so young and stupid and convinced we'd figured out something that clearly we hadn't. The vacation photos from our trip to Colorado, back when team building meant us building a relationship instead of her building something inappropriate with Derek. The candid shots from holidays and birthdays and random Tuesdays when we'd thought taking pictures of our dinner was important enough to document. All of it came down, got wrapped in newspaper, and went into a box labeled Ancient History, handle with indifference. Then came the locks. I'd stopped by Home Depot on my way back from the bakery, wandered through the security section like a man on a mission, and bought new deadbolts for both doors. The kind that required a key from both sides, because I wasn't taking any chances on Lydia letting herself in and trying to negotiate or explain or do whatever people do when they realize their actions have consequences. The hardware guy at the store, an older gentleman with kind eyes and calloused hands, had asked if I was upgrading for security reasons. You could say that, I'd replied. Keeping out unwanted elements. Smart man, he'd said. And I wondered how many other guys he'd sold locks to in similar situations, how many husbands had stood in that exact spot trying to protect what remained of their dignity and personal space. Installing the locks took about 40 minutes and required more swearing than I'd anticipated because apparently I'm better at emotional breakdowns than home improvement. But eventually both doors were secured with shiny new deadbolts that Lydia's keys would no longer open. I tested them multiple times, locked and unlocked them like a kid with a new toy, and felt a sense of satisfaction that probably wasn't healthy, but absolutely felt deserved. I wasn't being petty. Okay, I was being petty, but I was also being efficient. There's a difference between petty for the sake of being petty and petty as a strategic life choice that protects your peace and your property. This was the latter. This was self-care with a side of justified spite. This was me establishing boundaries that apparently needed to be established with physical barriers since emotional ones hadn't worked. Even Max seemed to understand what was happening. He'd been following me around all day, watching me pack boxes and change locks with those intelligent dog eyes that somehow always know more than they should. When I finally packed away the last of Lydia's things, when her perfume bottles were sealed in cardboard and her presence was officially erased from the immediate living space, Max sniffed once at the boxes stacked by the door, looked up at me, and then trotted over to his bed and lay down with a sigh that seemed to say, "Yeah, she's gone. Good riddance. Can we have dinner now?" That dog had more sense than I'd given him credit for. He stopped waiting at the door for her footsteps. He stopped perking up every time a car drove past the house. He just accepted it, moved on, adjusted to the new reality with the kind of emotional flexibility that humans spend thousands of dollars in therapy trying to achieve. When her perfume disappeared from the bathroom counter, when the air no longer smelled like whatever expensive fragrance she'd been wearing to impress Derek, Max didn't mourn it. He just went about his business like the house had always been this way, like Lydia had been a temporary resident who'd overstayed her welcome and finally checked out. That night, I poured myself a drink, the special occasion whiskey that was rapidly becoming my regular occasion whiskey at this rate, and turned off the porch light. That might sound like a small thing, insignificant even, but that porch light had been on every night for 7 years, a little beacon saying "Welcome home" to whoever needed it. Now it stayed off. The welcome mat got rolled up and shoved in the garage. The house went dark except for the rooms I was actually using, and I sat in my living room. My living room, singular possessive, no longer our living room, and slept like a man who'd finally deleted 2 gigabytes of emotional malware from his life's hard drive. No more wondering where she was. No more checking my phone every 10 minutes hoping for a text that would explain everything. No more lying awake at night doing mental gymnastics trying to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting, maybe there was a reasonable explanation, maybe I was just being insecure instead of observant. All that malware, all those corrupted files that had been slowing down my system and making everything harder than it needed to be, got permanently deleted with the changing of those locks. The boxes sat by the door like sentinels, like guards protecting my new peace. The locks gleamed in the hallway light, brass and new and uncompromised. The house felt lighter somehow, less cluttered, like removing one person's belongings had somehow removed years of accumulated tension and unspoken resentment. I stretched out on the couch, remote in hand, and watched whatever I wanted without negotiating or compromising or pretending to care about reality shows that made my brain hurt. This was it. The rebrand was complete. The locks were changed. The evidence was packaged. The lawyer was armed and ready. All that remained was for Lydia to come home and discover that home was no longer a place she had access to, that we had become me, and that her extended vacation with Derek had officially cost her everything she'd left behind. Monday, 11:12 a.m., and I was sitting in my living room drinking coffee and watching a home renovation show where people with unrealistic budgets complained about granite countertops when I heard it. The distinct sound of a key failing to do its one job. The scratching of metal against metal, the confused jiggling, the increasingly frustrated attempts to make a key work in a lock it no longer had any relationship with. It was music to my ears, a symphony of consequences playing out in real time on my front porch. Then came the knocking. Polite at first, the kind of knock you do when you think there's been some kind of mistake, some simple misunderstanding that can be cleared up with a conversation. Tap, tap, tap. Mark. Lydia's voice came through the door, confused but not yet panicked. Mark, my key's not working. Are you home? I took a long, slow sip of my coffee, savoring both the dark roast and the moment. Max looked up at me from his spot on the couch, tail wagging slightly, clearly wondering if we were going to acknowledge the person at the door or just continue enjoying our peaceful morning. I scratched behind his ears and counted to 10, letting her knock again before I responded. Oh no. I called through the door, my voice dripping with the kind of fake concern that wouldn't fool a toddler, but felt absolutely delicious to deliver. Must be that team-building retreat you went on. Guess they changed the locks on Honesty too, and the effects are spreading to actual locks. Crazy how that works. Maybe Derek knows a locksmith? He seems to know how to unlock a lot of things he shouldn't. The knocking stopped. There was a beat of silence, the kind of heavy pause that happens when someone's brain is trying to process information it doesn't want to accept, when reality is knocking on the door of delusion and delusion is pretending not to be home. Then the knocking resumed, harder this time, accompanied by the kind of voice that suggested panic was setting in. Mark, this isn't funny. Open the door. It's a little funny, I said, still not moving from my comfortable position on the couch. I mean, from where I'm sitting, drinking coffee in my house with locks that actually work, it's pretty entertaining. You should see it from my perspective. It's like watching a sitcom, except I already know the ending, and it's surprisingly satisfying. I heard her let out a sound of frustration, something between a groan and a scream, the kind of noise people make when they're realizing that their actions have consequences and they don't like it one bit. Part of me, a small part that still remembered being in love with this woman, felt a twinge of something that might have been guilt. But then I remembered the couple's massage charges, the romantic dinners, the champagne, and that twinge died faster than my trust in marriage vows. I stood up, walked to the door with Max following behind like my furry backup, and opened it exactly halfway. Not enough for her to push through, not enough for her to feel welcome, just enough to see her face and watch the realization dawn that this wasn't a joke or a misunderstanding or something that could be talked away with explanations and apologies. Her luggage was still neatly lined up on the porch where I'd placed it last night, 3 designer suitcases that had apparently been very necessary for her business conference, along with a manila envelope sitting on top like a cherry on the world's worst sundae. Lydia looked terrible, and I say that with the kind of objective observation that comes from no longer caring about someone's feelings. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged like she'd been crying or sleeping or both, and she was wearing the same outfit she'd left in 4 days ago, which suggested the return trip had been rushed and uncomfortable. Good. She deserved uncomfortable. Uncomfortable was the least of what she deserved. What's this? She asked, pointing at the manila envelope like it was a foreign object she'd never encountered before, like manila envelopes weren't universally recognized as the container for important documents, usually the kind that ruin your day or your life or both. Documents, receipts, and your favorite part, closure, I said, leaning against the doorframe with the kind of casual energy that suggested I had all day to stand here and watch her world crumble. The receipts are particularly interesting. Did you know the Grand Riviera Hotel itemizes their room service charges? Very detailed. Very thorough. Romantic charcuterie board for 2 foot really paints a picture, doesn't it? Really tells a story. My lawyer especially enjoyed that one. She actually laughed. Professional, composed Grace Mendoza laughed out loud when she saw that charge. Lydia's face went through about 17 different emotions in the span of 3 seconds, starting with confusion, moving through recognition, stopping briefly at denial, and finally settling on something that looked like panic mixed with regret and a dash of, oh shit, I really screwed up. She grabbed the manila envelope with shaking hands and started flipping through the papers, her eyes getting wider with each page. The divorce filing, the credit card statements highlighted in yellow, the screenshots of text messages, the printed social media posts, the timeline I'd created showing every charge and every lie. It was all there, organized alphabetically and chronologically, because if I was going to end a marriage, I was going to do it with the kind of attention to detail that would make accountants weep with pride. It's not what it looks like, she said, and I actually laughed out loud because that's what everyone says when they've been caught doing exactly what it looks like they were doing. It's the universal phrase of people who've run out of good lies and are desperately hoping that confidence alone will carry them through. Then it must be performance art, I replied, examining my fingernails like this conversation was boring me instead of giving me life. Experimental theater, maybe? The Unfaithful Wife, a study in bad decisions. Very avant-garde. Very bold. I especially liked Act 2 where you charged a couple's massage to our joint credit card. That was a nice touch. Really showed your commitment to the craft. Method acting at its finest. She started crying then, actual tears streaming down her face, and part of me waited to feel something. Sympathy, maybe. Regret. Some kind of softening that would make me question whether I was doing the right thing. But nothing came. I just stood there, hand on the door, watching her cry like I was watching a commercial for something I had no intention of buying. Those tears might have worked a week ago, might have made me doubt myself and wonder if I was overreacting. But that was before the receipts, before the lies, before I'd spent 72 hours cataloging every way she'd betrayed me and come to terms with the fact that our marriage had been dead long before she got on that plane. "Mark, please," she said through the tears, reaching for the door like she could push her way back into my life through sheer force of will and crying. "We can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can work through it. It was a mistake. I made a mistake. Don't throw away 7 years over a mistake." "Oh, we already did therapy," I said, gently blocking her hand from the door. "The therapist's name is Grace Mendoza. She's fantastic with legal paperwork. Has a law degree from Yale and everything. Really helped me process my feelings, which apparently are justified and grounds for divorce in this state. Very healing. Would recommend. 5 stars on Yelp if lawyers did Yelp reviews, which they probably should because people need to know which ones are good at destroying bad marriages." Her face crumpled even more, which I didn't think was physically possible, but apparently rock bottom has a basement. "Mark, please. I love you. This doesn't have to end like this. I can explain everything. Just let me explain." "Sorry, honey," I said, and the honey came out with enough venom to kill a small horse. "My subscription to Nonsense expired. Turns out it was a limited time offer and you used up all the available episodes. Show's been canceled. No renewal. The network decided to go in a different direction, specifically a direction that doesn't include lying spouses who think business trip is code for romantic vacation with my boss. You understand. It's not me, it's you. Actually, it's entirely you. 100% you." I started to close the door, done with this conversation and ready to get back to my coffee before it got cold, but she grabbed the edge and held on. She tried bargaining next, because apparently we were going through the 5 stages of grief, except this was the 5 stages of realizing you destroyed your own marriage and nobody feels sorry for you. Her hand was still on the door, knuckles white from gripping the edge like it was a life raft, and she was drowning in a sea of her own terrible decisions, which honestly wasn't that far from the truth. "We can fix this, Mark," she said again, voice desperate now. That kind of desperation that comes when you realize you're losing something you took for granted, and suddenly it seems valuable again. "We can go to therapy. Real therapy, not lawyers. We can talk about this. Work through it. Marriage is about forgiveness, right? About working through problems together? That's what we promised each other. For better or worse, remember?" "Oh, I remember," I said, leaning against the doorframe with the kind of relaxed posture that suggested I had all day to stand here and dismantle her arguments one by one. "I remember a lot of things. I remember those vows. I also remember the part where you promised to forsake all others, and I'm pretty sure that includes Derek and his PowerPoint presentations and his shirtless pool photos and his ability to rack up $400 spa charges. Pretty sure forsaking doesn't include couples massages with your boss. But maybe I misunderstood the traditional wedding vows. Maybe there's a new edition that came out that includes an adultery clause I wasn't informed about." She flinched like I'd slapped her, which was interesting because apparently hearing about her own actions was more painful than actually committing them. "It wasn't like that," she said, the tears still flowing, but now mixed with this edge of anger, like she was mad at me for calling out her behavior instead of being mad at herself for actually doing it. "You're making it sound worse than it was. It was just, Derek and I were just." "Just what?" I interrupted, because I genuinely wanted to hear what explanation she'd cobbled together during her panic-fueled drive home. "Just accidentally spending our savings on romantic dinners?" Just coincidentally booking couple spa packages? Just somehow finding yourselves in situations that look exactly like cheating, smell exactly like cheating, and are documented with receipts that literally say romantic in the itemized charges? That kind of just? Because I've got to tell you, Lydia, that's a lot of accidents for someone who claims to be good at her job. Makes me wonder about your competency in general if you keep accidentally doing things that destroy your marriage. You're being cruel, she said, and there was that word again. Cruel. Like I was the villain in this story for having the audacity to respond to her infidelity with something other than understanding and forgiveness. Like cruelty was me changing the locks and not her spending 4 days in a luxury hotel with another man while lying to my face about it. No, I corrected her, my voice going cold in a way that made even Max perk up his ears. Cruel would be if I'd done what you did. Cruel would be if I'd lied to you, spent our money on another woman, extended a trip without asking, and then came home expecting you to just accept whatever half-baked explanation I threw at you. Cruel would be if I'd made you sit at home wondering what I was doing while I posted nothing on social media and charged romantic dinners to our credit card. What I'm being is honest. I'm being direct. I'm being exactly as cold as the situation warrants, which apparently feels cruel to you, because you've gotten used to me being a doormat who accepted your explanations without question. She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up my hand because I wasn't done yet, because 7 years of being the understanding husband had apparently built up a reserve of things I needed to say, and now the dam was breaking. You want to go to therapy? Fine. Go to therapy. Work on yourself. Figure out why you thought this was acceptable behavior. But you're going to do it alone, as a single woman, because I'm done. I'm done being the guy who waits at home. I'm done being Larry to Derek's sense of humor. I'm done checking my phone every 5 minutes hoping for a text from my own wife. I'm done pretending that marriages survive this kind of betrayal just because we've invested time into it. Sunk cost fallacy doesn't apply to relationships, sweetheart. Just because we've been together for 7 years doesn't mean I'm obligated to sign up for more. Mark, please, she tried again. But the please was getting weaker now, less convinced of its own power to change anything. Don't do this. Don't throw everything away. Think about what we built together. Think about our home, our life, our future. Think about. I am thinking about it, I said, and my voice was so calm it surprised even me. I'm thinking about how I built a life with someone I thought I knew, someone I trusted, someone who turned out to be completely different than who I thought she was. I'm thinking about how our home became a place where I waited alone while you were out building a different future with someone else. I'm thinking about how every time you said, I love you for the past few months, maybe longer, I don't even know anymore. You were already planning this or doing this or thinking about this. I'm thinking about all of it, Lydia, and you know what conclusion I keep coming to? That I deserve better. That I deserve someone who doesn't need a business trip to remember they're married. That I deserve honesty and respect and basic human decency, none of which you've shown me since you got on that plane Thursday morning. She was full-on sobbing now, the kind of crying that makes your whole body shake, and I waited to feel something other than vindication. Waited for the guilt to kick in, for the part of me that had loved her to resurface and make this harder. But it didn't come. There was just this clear, cold certainty that I was doing exactly the right thing, that this was the only acceptable response to what she'd done, that being kind now would just be another form of being a doormat. You're heartless, she said through the sobs, and I actually laughed at that because the irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife and serve it at one of Derek's romantic dinners. No, I said, shaking my head with a smile that probably looked terrifying because it was genuine. Just upgraded from naive to logical, from trusting to observant, from doormat to person with boundaries and self-respect. Heartless would be if I'd stopped loving you years ago and just stayed for convenience. What I am is someone who loved you enough to be completely destroyed by what you did, and who loves himself enough not to let that destruction become permanent. There's a difference. She started to say something else, probably another variation of please, or we can fix this, or some other phrase designed to buy time and create doubt, but I was done with the conversation. I'd said what I needed to say, she'd heard what she needed to hear, and standing in this doorway wasn't going to change anything except make my coffee get cold and waste my time. The papers are in the envelope, I said, Gesturing to the manila folder, she was still clutching like it might transform into something less life-threatening if she just held it tight enough. My lawyer's contact information is on page 3. Her rates are reasonable. Her track record is excellent. And she doesn't put up with bullshit, which is refreshing after dealing with your explanations for the past 5 months of working late that I now realize were probably not actually work-related. You've got 30 days to respond to the filing. After that, it proceeds whether you cooperate or not. Your stuff is in the boxes. I was very careful with it because unlike some people, I still have basic respect for other people's property even when they've lost my respect in every other way. She wheeled her suitcase toward the boxes, moving like someone in a dream or a nightmare, her hands shaking as she tried to figure out the logistics of transporting 3 suitcases and 5 boxes full of her belongings to wherever she was planning to go next. Probably Derek's place, I thought with a spike of bitter satisfaction. Probably she'd call him crying, and he'd come get her, and they'd console each other about what a terrible person I was for not just accepting infidelity as a normal part of modern marriage. As she struggled with the boxes, Mrs. Alvarez from next door peeked over our shared fence, her perfectly coiffed white hair catching the sunlight, and her eyes bright with the kind of curiosity that suggested she'd been watching this entire interaction like it was her personal Netflix drama. Mrs. Alvarez was 73, had been widowed for a decade, and had the kind of nosiness that comes from having too much time and not enough excitement in her daily routine. She was also sweet as pie and had brought me casseroles twice since Lydia left, so I couldn't be mad at her for being interested in the neighborhood drama. "Everything okay, dear?" she called over the fence, her voice full of concern that was probably 80% genuine and 20% desire for gossip to share at her bridge club. "Everything's being audited, Mrs. Alvarez," I called back, giving her a wave and a smile that was probably the most genuine expression I'd made all morning. "Spring cleaning came early this year. Getting rid of things that don't serve me anymore. You know how it is. Out with the old, in with the peace and quiet." The look on Mrs. Alvarez's face was absolutely priceless. This mixture of shock and understanding and barely suppressed glee that told me she knew exactly what was happening and would be dining out on this story for months. She gave me a thumbs up that was probably inappropriate for the situation but felt completely warranted, and I gave her one back because apparently we were now partners in the neighborhood drama, and I was okay with that. Lydia shot Mrs. Alvarez a look that could have melted steel, grabbed as many boxes as she could carry, and started loading them into her car with the kind of angry efficiency that comes from embarrassment mixed with defeat. I watched from the doorway, coffee in hand, Max sitting beside me like the world's most supportive wingman, and felt absolutely nothing except relief that this was finally happening, that the pretending was over, that I could finally start the process of becoming someone who didn't check his phone obsessively or wonder where his wife was or accept explanations that didn't actually explain anything. Weeks later, life had settled into something that felt weirdly peaceful, like the calm after a storm, except the storm had been 7 years long and I'd been standing in it pretending it was just light rain. The house smelled different now, less like floral guilt and expensive perfume designed to impress bosses who couldn't keep their boundaries professional, and more like WD-40 and the kind of simple existence that comes from not having to wonder where someone is, or what they're doing, or whether that heart emoji actually means anything. I'd gotten into a routine that didn't involve checking my phone every 45 seconds or analyzing text messages for hidden meanings. I woke up when I wanted, made coffee how I liked it without someone complaining it was too strong, and spent my evenings doing whatever the hell I felt like doing without negotiating or compromising or pretending to care about reality shows that made my brain hurt. It was glorious. It was peaceful. It was everything I didn't know I'd been missing while I was busy being married to someone who apparently saw our vows as more of a suggestion than a binding agreement. Jason, my coworker and the closest thing I had to a best friend in the traditional sense, cornered me by the coffee machine at work one Tuesday morning with the kind of knowing look that suggested he'd been waiting for the right moment to comment on my apparent transformation. Jason was one of those perpetually single guys who swore up and down that marriage was a trap and he was too smart to fall for it, which always felt like protesting too much, but now seemed oddly prescient. "Man, you're glowing," he said, pouring himself a cup of the sludge our office tried to pass off as coffee. "Like actually glowing. You get a new skincare routine or something?" Because whatever you're doing, it's working. You look 10 years younger. Did you discover the fountain of youth, or did you just discover being single? Freedom and no phone checking at 2 in the morning. I replied, adding sugar to my cup with the kind of casual energy that came from actually sleeping through the night, instead of lying awake wondering if my wife was texting someone who wasn't me. Highly recommended. 10 out of 10, would divorce again. Actually, no, I wouldn't, because I'm never getting married again, but if I did, I'd definitely divorce if necessary. Really clears the complexion. Does wonders for your mental health. Should be prescribed by doctors instead of antidepressants. Jason laughed, the kind of laugh that said he knew exactly what I was talking about, even though he'd never been married himself. Dude, I tried to warn you. Remember at your bachelor party? I said marriage was just a legally binding agreement to be disappointed for the rest of your life. You said I was cynical. Who's cynical now? You're still cynical, I said, taking a sip of terrible coffee that somehow tasted better now that I wasn't drinking it while stressed about my crumbling marriage. But you were also right, which is annoying. Don't let it go to your head. Your ego's already insufferable. The divorce had been proceeding smoothly, which apparently happens when you have overwhelming evidence and a lawyer who doesn't mess around. Grace had called last week to tell me that Lydia's lawyer had reviewed the case and strongly advised her to settle rather than drag this out in court, where all those receipts would become public record. Smart move on their part. Less smart was Lydia's decision to cheat in the first place, but apparently wisdom wasn't her strong suit. Lydia's mom had texted me about a week after the lockout incident. One of those messages that started with, "I heard what happened," and ended with, "Can you tell me your side of the story?" Like there were multiple valid interpretations of credit card statements showing couples massages and romantic dinners. I debated ignoring it, but ultimately decided that honesty was the best policy, especially when honesty involved forwarding screenshots of receipts. Check the receipts, I texted back. They tell it better than I ever could. Specifically the one for the romantic charcuterie board for two. Really paints a picture. Very illuminating. Your daughter has excellent taste in expensive cheese that she paid for with our joint account. She hadn't responded after that, which I took as either acceptance of the facts or the realization that her daughter had screwed up so spectacularly that there wasn't really a defense to be mounted. Either way, I appreciated the silence. Silence was underrated. Silence meant nobody was trying to explain away the unexplainable or make excuses for the inexcusable. Cass, one of Lydia's old friends from college who'd somehow remained friendly with me throughout the years, messaged me out of the blue on a Saturday afternoon while I was in the garage working on my motorcycle, which I'd finally had time to fix now that my evenings weren't spent pretending everything was fine in my marriage. "Do you regret it?" her message read, and I could practically hear the concern in her digital voice, the kind of worry that comes from people who still believe in working things out and second chances and all those concepts that sound great in theory, but ignore the reality of betrayal. I wiped the grease off my hands, picked up my phone, and typed back without hesitation. Only that I didn't hire Grace sooner. Could have saved myself months of wondering if I was crazy for being suspicious. Turns out I wasn't crazy, just married to someone who thought business trips were a valid excuse for bad behavior. Live and learn. Actually, divorce and learn. That's the new motto. Cass sent back a crying laughing emoji followed by, "Fair enough. You deserve better." It was nice to have that acknowledgement, that validation from someone who'd known both of us and could objectively see that I wasn't the villain in this story, that I'd done exactly what any reasonable person would do when faced with overwhelming evidence of infidelity and zero remorse. Now I spent my evenings doing things I actually enjoyed instead of things I'd convinced myself were couple activities. I grilled steaks that were seasoned exactly how I liked them without anyone complaining they were too peppery. I fixed my motorcycle, that 1987 Harley Sportster I'd bought before the wedding and barely touched during the marriage because Lydia thought it was dangerous and a waste of money, ignoring the irony that her romantic getaway with Derek had cost approximately 3 times what the bike was worth. I watched sports without commentary from someone who didn't understand why grown men cared about balls going into nets or over lines. I listened to music at volumes that weren't unreasonable just because someone else had different preferences. I existed in my own space on my own terms, and it felt better than any marriage had ever felt, which probably said something profound about the state of that marriage, but I was too busy enjoying my freedom to analyze it too deeply. The moral of this entire story, if there was one beyond, don't marry people who think company retreats are legitimate excuses for infidelity, was simple. Never argue with liars. Don't engage in debates about what happened or what things mean or whether you're overreacting. Just hand them paperwork. Let the lawyers and the receipts do the talking. Let the evidence speak for itself while you sit back and enjoy the peace that comes from no longer having to defend reality to people who've chosen to live in fantasy land. And for the record, because I know you're wondering, I sleep great. Like a baby. Like someone who's finally figured out that being alone is infinitely better than being with someone who makes you feel alone. Peace and silence are underrated, especially in a world that tells you marriage is the ultimate goal and being single is somehow failure. Turns out the real failure was staying in a situation that required me to ignore my instincts and accept explanations that didn't explain anything. Lydia is still trying to explain everything later, according to mutual friends who can't help but update me on her life, even though I've made it clear I don't care. Apparently, later still hasn't arrived, which tracks with her general approach to honesty and accountability. Meanwhile, I'm living my best life with a clean conscience, a cleaner house, and the kind of emotional clarity that only comes from finally choosing yourself over someone who was never going to choose you back. The divorce will be final in about 2 months. I've already planned a party. Nothing huge, just close friends, good whiskey, and maybe those cupcakes from the bakery that understood the assignment the first time. Jason's bringing steaks. Mrs. Alvarez is bringing her famous potato salad and probably some gossip from the neighborhood watch meetings. Max is bringing his A-game cuteness and the unconditional love that only dogs can provide. It's going to be perfect, just like my life is now, just like it should have been all along. Turns out happiness was always an option. I just had to be willing to change the locks to find it. My wife invited me to her company Christmas party with all her colleagues. Then she walked out of the bathroom with her male coworker and announced to everyone, "He's my real partner now. You're just here for appearances." Everyone laughed and agreed. I smiled, took a sip, and quietly left. 3 days later, complete company chaos. You ever walk into a situation thinking you're just showing up for free appetizers and maybe some decent wine, only to walk out with emotional trauma that'll keep your therapist's kids in private school for the next decade? Yeah, that was me on December 15th, and let me tell you, the shrimp cocktail wasn't even worth it. I'm Gavin Miles, 41 years old, former architect turned consultant, which is just a fancy way of saying I design buildings and tell other people how not to screw up their designs. I've got salt and pepper hair that makes me look distinguished instead of old, a gym membership I actually use, and up until that particular evening, I thought I had a pretty solid marriage. Emphasis on thought, because clearly I was living in the same fantasy land where people actually read terms and conditions before clicking I agree. My wife Clara, 38, worked at Arden & Company, this high-end fashion brand based right here in Nashville that sells handbags for the price of a used Honda Civic. She'd been climbing the corporate ladder there for the past 6 years, and honestly, I was proud of her. She was their VP of brand development, which meant she went to a lot of meetings where people used words like synergy and ideation without a trace of irony. When she invited me to their annual Christmas party, her tone had this weird mix of obligation and excitement, like she was presenting me to the Queen of England, but wasn't entirely sure I wouldn't embarrass her by using the wrong fork. The party was held at this pretentious downtown loft with exposed brick walls, Edison bulbs hanging from the ceiling like industrial fireflies, and enough craft cocktails to make a hipster weep with joy. Everyone was dressed like they'd raided the wardrobe department of a show about wealthy people with emotional problems, which, as it turns out, was pretty accurate. I played my part perfectly, shook hands, laughed at jokes that weren't funny, complimented someone's shoes even though they looked like geometric nightmares, the whole 9 yards. Clara seemed happy, or at least she wasn't shooting me those "please don't embarrass me" looks she usually reserved for family gatherings. The night was going fine, great even, right up until it wasn't. I was standing by the bar, contemplating whether my third Manhattan was a good idea or just a necessary one, when Clara emerged from the bathroom. But she wasn't alone. She was holding hands with Eli Hart, the company's marketing manager, this 30-something guy with perfectly sculpted stubble and the kind of confidence that comes from never having experienced real consequences. They walked into the main room like they were making some kind of grand entrance, and honestly, they kind of were. Then Clara, my wife of 7 years, the woman who once cried during a commercial about rescue dogs, looked directly at me with this weird mixture of defiance and excitement and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "He's my real partner now. Gavin's just here for appearances." She said it like she was announcing a promotion, like she'd just been named Employee of the Month for most creative betrayal. The room went dead silent for maybe 2 seconds, which in social situations feels like 2 years, and then it happened. They laughed. Not that uncomfortable, nervous laughter you hear when someone tells an inappropriate joke at a funeral. I'm talking full-on, genuine, belly-aching, table-slapping, doubled-over laughter. Like she'd just told the funniest joke in the history of comedy. Someone actually spat out their drink. Another person was wiping tears from their eyes. Clara was smiling like she'd just won an Oscar, and Eli had this smug grin that made me want to introduce his face to the nearest wall. I just stood there, Manhattan in hand, watching my marriage implode in real time while being scored by a room full of strangers who apparently thought public humiliation was peak entertainment. For a second, I felt this weird out-of-body sensation, like I was watching this happen to someone else. Then reality crashed back in, and I realized something profound. I finally understood how Wi-Fi feels when someone disconnects it. 1 second you're connected, everything's working fine, and the next second you're just not. Gone. Irrelevant. Just there for show. But here's the thing, I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't throw my drink in anyone's face, even though God knows I wanted to throw it in several faces. Instead, I did something that apparently nobody expected. I smiled, raised my champagne glass like I was toasting to their happiness, and took a slow, deliberate sip. Then I set the glass down on the bar, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the exit with the kind of calm that probably made me look either incredibly mature or completely psychotic. Honestly, I was going for a mix of both. The laughter followed me out, echoing off those trendy exposed brick walls like a soundtrack to my humiliation. I could hear Clara calling after me, her voice suddenly uncertain, like maybe she'd just realized she'd made a tactical error. But I didn't turn around. I just kept walking through the loft, down the stairs, out into the December cold that hit my face like a slap from reality itself. Outside, the Nashville streets were decorated with Christmas lights that suddenly seemed way too cheerful for the occasion. The wind cut right through my suit jacket, but I barely felt it. I was too busy feeling that special combination of rage and clarity that comes from having your entire worldview shattered in the span of 30 seconds. I stood there on the sidewalk, watching my breath form clouds in the cold air, and pulled out my phone. I scrolled to Mark Rutherford's name, my lawyer, my best friend since college, the guy who'd been my best man and had actually warned me that Clara's ambition might be a problem someday. I'd laughed it off back then. Funny how hindsight makes you want to punch your past self in the face. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Gavin, you okay? Isn't tonight the phase 2?" I said, cutting him off. My voice was calm, maybe too calm, the kind of calm that comes right before a Category 5 hurricane makes landfall. There was a pause, and then I heard Mark's tone shift from concern to something else. Something sharp. "Already waiting for your call, boss. I've got the paperwork ready." I hung up and stood there for another minute, watching through the loft's windows as the party continued without me. They were still laughing up there, probably already turning my humiliation into an anecdote they'd share at future parties. Remember when Clara dumped Gavin in front of everyone? Classic. What they didn't know, what Clara had apparently forgotten in her rush to publicly destroy our marriage, was that I wasn't just some accessory husband who showed up to work events and smiled for photos. 6 years ago, when Clara was trying to launch her career and needed capital to buy into Arden and Company's executive track, I'd invested $350,000 of my own money. Money I'd made from selling a commercial property design that had done exceptionally well. She'd been so grateful back then, so full of promises about how we were a team, partners in everything. Turns out, we were partners right up until she found a better offer. But here's what Clara forgot, probably because she was too busy playing corporate rising star and apparently planning her grand betrayal. That money made me a shareholder. A quiet one, sure, but a shareholder nonetheless. And while she'd been working late for the past year, which I now understood meant something very different than I'd thought, I'd been doing something too. I'd been buying more shares. quietly, carefully, through shell corporations and legal structures that Mark had helped me set up. Not because I suspected anything, but because I'm an architect turned consultant, and we plan for structural integrity. We think long-term. We build foundations that last. As I walked to my car, I felt something settle in my chest. Not quite peace, but something close to it. Purpose, maybe. Clarity. The kind of focus you get when someone hands you a blueprint for revenge, and all you have to do is follow the lines. I got in my car, turned on the heat, and checked my phone. 27 text messages, all from Clara. I scrolled through them without opening any. It was a misunderstanding. You embarrassed me by leaving. Gavin, can we please talk? You're overreacting. Everyone thinks you're being dramatic. I deleted every single one without responding, started the engine, and drove home through streets decorated with lights that suddenly seemed a little brighter, a little more promising. When I got home, I poured myself a whiskey, the good stuff, the bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion, and sat down with my cat, Whiskers, who gave me the same pitying look she probably reserved for the mice she occasionally left on the doorstep. Don't look at me like that, I told her. I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. And weirdly enough, I meant it. Because sometimes, the worst night of your life is just the opening act to something so much better. You just have to be patient enough to wait for the curtain to rise on Act 2. When I got home that night, I made a conscious decision to pour whiskey instead of emotions, which I thought showed remarkable restraint considering the circumstances. I sat in my leather armchair, the one Clara always said looked too masculine for the living room, but I kept anyway, because sometimes a man needs a chair that understands him, and just stared at the wall for a solid 10 minutes. Whiskers jumped into my lap, kneaded my thigh with her claws like she was tenderizing meat, and settled in with a purr that sounded almost sympathetic. Even my cat felt bad for me, which was either touching or pathetic, and I wasn't ready to decide which. Here's the thing nobody tells you about getting publicly humiliated by your spouse. You don't immediately crumble into a sobbing mess like they show in movies. At least, I didn't. Instead, I felt this weird sense of clarity, like someone had just handed me a puzzle, and I could finally see how all the pieces fit together. All those late nights at the office, all those team-building weekends, all those times she'd come home smelling like cologne that definitely wasn't mine. It all made sense now. I wasn't heartbroken so much as deeply, profoundly amused by how confidently stupid people can be when they think they're getting away with something. Clara didn't just cheat on me. No, that would have been too simple, too pedestrian. She turned it into a full production, complete with a public announcement and an audience that apparently thought betrayal was the height of entertainment. She made it a PowerPoint presentation with visual aids and a Q&A session. I almost had to respect the audacity of it, except that I was the one getting screwed, and not in the fun way. My phone buzzed again. Text number 32 from Clara, if anyone was counting, and I absolutely was. I ignored it and called Mark instead. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he'd been waiting for me to call back. How you holding up? He asked, and I could hear the concern in his voice mixed with something else. Anticipation, maybe. Mark had been my friend long enough to know that I didn't get mad the way normal people got mad. I got methodical. I'm great, I said, taking a sip of whiskey that burned in the best possible way. Really, truly fantastic. I just watched my wife hold hands with her coworker and announce to a room full of strangers that I'm basically a Ken doll she keeps around for decoration, and honestly, I've never felt more focused in my entire life. That's the spirit, Mark said, and I could hear him shuffling papers on his end. So, let's talk about what you actually own, shall we? Because I've got the documentation right here, and buddy, it's even better than we thought. This is where the story gets interesting. And by interesting, I mean where Karma decides to suit up and enter the game wearing steel-toed boots. See, 6 years ago, when Clara was still pretending to be madly in love with me, and not just madly in love with the idea of corporate success, she'd come to me with this opportunity. Arden and Company was expanding, and they were offering executive positions to people who could bring capital investment to the table. Clara was brilliant at her job, I'll give her that, but she didn't have the cash to buy in at the level she wanted. That's where I came in, the supportive husband with money from a successful commercial property design that had earned me more than I'd expected. I gave her $350,000. Not as a gift, mind you, but as an investment. We'd structured it properly, with Mark's help, because even back then I believed in protecting assets. That money bought shares in the company, made me a shareholder, gave me a seat at the table even if I never chose to sit in it. Clara knew this, obviously. She'd signed the paperwork. She'd thanked me probably 1,000 times. But here's the thing about people who get successful. They start to forget where they came from. They start to rewrite history in their heads until they're the hero of their own story, and everyone else is just a supporting character. Clara forgot that I was a shareholder. Or maybe she just stopped thinking it mattered because I'd never exercised any of my rights as one. I'd been the silent partner, the supportive husband who showed up to events and smiled for photos and never made waves. But while she'd been working late with Eli, and now I couldn't even think about what that meant without wanting to disinfect my entire house, I'd been doing some work of my own. Talk to me about the shell corporations, I said to Mark, and I heard him chuckle on the other end. You're going to love this, he said. Over the past 18 months, through the 3 LLCs we set up, you've been quietly buying shares whenever they became available. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger attention, but consistent. And with the shares you already owned from the initial investment, plus everything we've acquired since. He paused for dramatic effect, and I could practically hear his grin through the phone. You now own 52% of Arden and Company. I sat up so fast that Whiskers made an indignant noise and jumped off my lap. Say that again. 52%, Gavin. You're the majority shareholder. You own the company. Well, the controlling interest in it, anyway. Clara works for you now. Eli works for you. Everyone who laughed at you tonight works for you. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. It started as a chuckle and built into full-blown laughter that probably would have concerned Whiskers if she wasn't already concerned about me disturbing her sleep schedule. The irony was just too perfect, too absolutely beautiful to not appreciate. Clara had thrown away our marriage for a guy who worked at a company I now effectively owned. She'd humiliated me in front of people who were technically my employees. She'd made the tactical error of the century, and she didn't even know it yet. Mark, I said when I could finally speak again, I need you to prepare documentation for a board meeting. Monday morning. And I need it to be airtight, because what I'm about to do is going to make tonight's party look like a warm-up act. Already on it, he said. I'll have everything ready by Sunday night. But Gavin, are you sure about this? Once you do this, there's no going back. This is going to be nuclear. Nuclear, I said, taking another sip of whiskey and feeling it warm my chest. Mark, nuclear is what Clara did to our marriage in front of 50 people who thought it was hilarious. What I'm about to do is just business. Just restructuring. Just a majority shareholder exercising his rights to improve company performance. You're terrifying when you're calm like this, Mark said, but he sounded proud. I know, I said. It's one of my best qualities. After we hung up, I sat there for another hour, just thinking. My phone kept buzzing with texts from Clara, each one more desperate than the last. I scrolled through them without opening any, reading the preview text that appeared on my screen. Gavin, please, we need to talk. I know you're upset, but you're being childish. Eli and I didn't mean for it to happen this way. Can you at least acknowledge that you received these messages? You're making this so much harder than it needs to be. Everyone is asking me where you went. You embarrassed me by leaving like that. That last one made me laugh out loud. I embarrassed her. I wasn't the one who decided to announce an affair at a Christmas party like it was a gender reveal. But that was Clara for you. Always able to make herself the victim. Always able to twist the narrative until she came out looking sympathetic. It had worked on me for 7 years, but apparently, my subscription to her particular brand of manipulation had just expired. I thought about responding. I really did. I had about 15 different replies typed out and deleted, each one more sarcastic than the last. But then I realized something. Silence was more powerful than anything I could say right now. Silence would drive her crazy. Silence would make her wonder what I was thinking, what I was planning, whether I was okay or falling apart. And while she was wondering, I'd be preparing. Instead of texting her back, I did something that probably qualified as petty but felt absolutely necessary for my mental health. I ordered flowers to be delivered to her office the next day. Not roses, those were too romantic. Not lilies, those were for funerals, and I wasn't quite that dark yet. No, I ordered black tulips, which apparently exist and symbolize farewell and rebirth. According to the florist's website, I spent 20 minutes browsing. I had them include a note in my handwriting that said simply, "Congratulations on your new partner. See you Monday. Short. Professional. With just enough ambiguity to make her paranoid about what Monday might bring. Perfect. I finished my whiskey, gave Whiskers fresh food because at least one of us deserved to have a good night, and went to bed. I expected to lie awake all night, replaying the party scene over and over, but instead I fell asleep almost immediately. Turns out, having a plan is better than Ambien. When I woke up Saturday morning, I had 43 texts from Clara, 6 missed calls, and a voicemail that I deleted without listening to. I also had a text from Mark with a simple message. The paperwork is beautiful. You're going to destroy her. I smiled, made coffee, and started preparing for Monday. Because if Clara wanted to play games with my life, that was fine. But she'd forgotten one crucial detail. I was an architect. I built things. I planned things. I made sure the foundation was solid before I ever started construction. And the foundation I'd built was about to bring her whole world crashing down. Saturday morning hit different when you're planning corporate warfare over your breakfast cereal. I was sitting at my kitchen counter, scrolling through my phone and eating Lucky Charms like a responsible adult, when I saw it. Clara had posted on Instagram. At 7 in the morning. On a Saturday. The woman who usually didn't wake up before 9 on weekends had apparently been up early enough to curate her public humiliation of me into social media content. The photo was one of those annoyingly perfect couple shots. Clara and Eli sitting in some trendy coffee shop with exposed brick walls, because of course, their hands intertwined on the table between 2 artisanal lattes that probably cost more than my lunch. They were both smiling like they'd just discovered the cure for cancer instead of basic infidelity. The caption read, "Real love starts when you stop pretending. Sparkles 2 hearts hashtag authentic life hashtag new beginnings hashtag love wins." I stared at my phone for a solid 30 seconds, a Lucky Charms marshmallow halfway to my mouth, trying to process the sheer audacity of what I was looking at. Real love starts when you stop pretending? Lady, you still pretend to like kale. I've seen you spit it into napkins when you think nobody's watching. You pretend to enjoy jogging. You pretend your natural hair color isn't 3 shades darker than what you show the world. Your entire life is a performance, and now you're posting inspirational quotes about authenticity like you're some kind of relationship guru instead of someone who just blew up a 7-year marriage for a guy whose entire personality is based on owning a vintage motorcycle. I took a screenshot because documentation is important and forwarded it to Mark with a simple message. Evidence exhibit for the character assassination she's doing to herself. He texted back immediately, which meant he was already awake and probably working on Monday's presentation. Perfect. Let the audience build. The higher she climbs on that moral high ground, the further she has to fall. Also, did she really use 3 hashtags about love? That's not confidence. That's overcompensation. Mark got it. This was why we've been friends since college. The man understood psychology and legal strategy in equal measure, which made him either the perfect lawyer or a future supervillain. Possibly both. I spent the rest of Saturday doing something that probably would have concerned a therapist. I went through Clara's entire social media presence for the past year. Every post, every comment, every tagged photo. I wasn't looking for evidence of the affair. That ship had sailed, crashed into an iceberg, and sunk to the bottom of the ocean. No, I was looking for patterns. For the narrative she'd been building. For the story she'd been telling herself and everyone else about who we were as a couple. What I found was fascinating in the most depressing way possible. 6 months ago, her posts about us had started to shift. Where she used to post couple photos with captions about partnership and teamwork, she'd started posting solo shots with captions about finding yourself and growth and not settling for comfortable. 3 months ago, the posts about me stopped entirely. It was like I'd been erased from her digital life long before she'd decided to erase me from her actual one. Meanwhile, Eli had started appearing in the background of her work photos. Always just slightly too close to be professional. Always with that same smug smile that made me want to introduce his face to a wall. The comments on her new post were rolling in fast. Most of them were supportive in that shallow social media way where people leave heart emojis and you go girl, without actually knowing what they're supporting. But there were a few that caught my attention. Wait, wasn't she married? This is messy lol. I feel bad for her husband tbh. Homegirl really aired out her marriage on Instagram? Bold strategy. At least some people had functioning brain cells and a sense of social decorum. I screenshotted those too because why not? At this point, I was basically building a digital scrapbook of my wife's public meltdown, and honestly, it was more entertaining than anything on Netflix. Around noon, I met up with Stella Brooks, my financial analyst. Stella was one of those terrifyingly competent people who made you feel like you weren't using your life efficiently enough. She was 34, always dressed like she was about to close a deal that would make the Forbes list, and had the kind of analytical mind that could spot financial patterns in data the way some people could spot shapes in clouds. Mark had recommended her 18 months ago when I'd first started thinking about expanding my investment portfolio, and she'd been instrumental in helping me quietly acquire shares in Arden & Company without triggering any red flags. We met at a coffee shop, ironically, the same chain where Clara and Eli had taken their Instagram photo, though different location. I ordered a black coffee because I was too tired for pretentious drink orders, and Stella got something with 4 different specifications that the barista had to write down. "So," she said, opening her laptop before we'd even sat down, "I've been running the numbers all morning, and Gavin, you're going to love this." She turned the screen toward me, showing a spreadsheet that looked like it had been designed by someone who dreamed in Excel formulas. "Between your initial investment, the shares you've acquired through the shell corporations, and the stocks that came available last month when Peterson retired from the board, you now own 52.3% of Arden & Company. Point 3, I said. That point 3 feels important. It is, Stella said, smiling in that way that meant she'd found something particularly interesting in the data. It means that even if Clara somehow convinced every other shareholder to vote against you, which she won't because most of them don't even know who you are, you still have absolute controlling interest. You're not just the majority shareholder, Gavin. You're untouchable." I sat back in my chair and let that sink in. Untouchable. Funny how 24 hours ago, I'd felt like the most touchable person in the world, touched by humiliation, touched by betrayal, touched by the laughter of 50 people who thought my pain was hilarious. Now I was untouchable. The irony was so perfect it almost felt scripted. "What about her position?" I asked. "VP of Brand Development. What kind of authority does that give her?" Stella pulled up another document. "She reports directly to the CEO, has budgetary authority up to $50,000 per project, and sits on the executive committee. However, all of that is contingent on board approval, and the board answers to the majority shareholder, which is you. So technically, you could remove her from her position with a simple board vote." "Could," I said. "But will I?" "That's above my pay grade," Stella said, though her smile suggested she knew exactly what I was planning. "I'm just here to tell you that financially and legally, you have every right to restructure the company however you see fit. If you decide that restructuring includes removing executives who, say, violate company ethics policies or create hostile work environments, that's entirely within your purview as majority shareholder." I loved the way Stella talked. Everything was clinical, professional, completely divorced from emotion, even though we both knew exactly what we were discussing. She wasn't saying, "You can fire your cheating wife." She was saying, "You can remove executives who violate company policy." Same outcome, completely different optics. We spent the next hour going over every detail of Monday's plan. Stella had prepared financial reports, performance metrics, and company projections that would make it clear to everyone in that boardroom that I wasn't making decisions based on personal vendetta. I was making decisions based on what was best for the company. The fact that what was best for the company happened to align perfectly with what was best for my revenge was just a happy coincidence. "One more thing," Stella said as we were packing up. "You should know that rumors are already circulating at Arden & Company about what happened at the party. Social media moves fast, and apparently, several people who were there posted about it. Nothing explicit, just vague posts about drama, and didn't see that coming. But enough that people are talking." "Good," I said. "Let them talk. By Monday morning, they'll have a lot more to talk about." When I got home that evening, my phone showed 67 unread texts from Clara. 67. The woman had apparently decided that the best response to me ignoring her was to simply send more messages, like I was a vending machine that would eventually give her what she wanted if she just kept pressing buttons. I didn't read any of them. Instead, I confirmed the flower delivery for Monday morning, black tulips, arriving at 9 a.m., an hour before the board meeting. I'd specified that they be delivered to her office with the note displayed prominently, because subtle was for people who weren't trying to make a point. The note read, Congratulations on your new partner. See you Monday. Short, professional, and with just enough ominous undertone to make her spend the entire weekend wondering what the hell I meant by see you Monday. Was I coming to beg for her back? Was I coming to cause a scene? Was I coming to finally have the conversation she claimed she wanted? She'd spend all weekend guessing, and she'd be wrong on every count. Sunday was quiet. I worked out, went for a run, meal prepped for the week like a responsible adult who definitely wasn't planning to destroy his wife's career in less than 24 hours. Mark sent me the final documentation around 8 p.m. Everything was perfect, every legal I dotted and corporate T crossed. Stella sent her reports an hour later. Everything was ready. I laid out my best suit, charcoal gray, the one that made me look like I could foreclose on your house and feel nothing about it. I picked out a tie that Clara had once said made me look too intimidating for casual events. Perfect. I wasn't going to a casual event. I was going to war, and I was going to look damn good doing it. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Maybe years. Because tomorrow, the people who'd laughed at me were going to learn a very important lesson. Never humiliate someone who holds your professional life in their hands. And definitely never do it at a party where someone can take video evidence of you being terrible humans. Tomorrow was going to be spectacular. Monday morning, I woke up at 5:30 with the kind of clarity usually reserved for people who found religion or survived near-death experiences. I felt good. Better than good, actually. I felt like I'd finally figured out the cheat code to a game I'd been losing without realizing I was playing. I went for a run, came back, showered, and stood in front of my closet picking out armor for battle. Except my armor was a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Eli's monthly rent. This wasn't just any suit. This was the suit I wore when I needed to close deals, the one that made me look like I could buy your company before lunch and still have time for a relaxed afternoon meeting. I paired it with a crisp white shirt, a dark blue tie that Clara once said made me look too intimidating for casual events, and cufflinks my grandfather had given me that had actual weight to them. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. I looked like a man who forgave nothing but looked absolutely amazing while holding grudges. The drive to Arden and Company's office building should have made me nervous. It didn't. I had the radio on some classic rock station, singing along to songs about rebellion and freedom like I was the protagonist in a movie about corporate revenge. Which, to be fair, I kind of was. Every red light felt like the universe giving me time to mentally prepare for what was about to happen. Every green light felt like permission to proceed with the plan. I arrived at 8:45, early enough to make a statement, but not so early that it looked desperate. The building was one of those modern glass structures that reflected the sky and made you feel small when you walked in, which I'm sure was intentional. The lobby had that new money smell, expensive coffee, designer perfume, and the faint scent of people trying too hard to appear successful. I nodded at the security guard, who looked at me with confusion because I'd never actually been to Clara's office before despite being married to her for 7 years. That probably should have told me something about our relationship, but hindsight is 20/20 and also a smug jerk. I took the elevator to the 7th floor, where the executive offices lived in their climate-controlled luxury. The doors opened, and I stepped out into a hallway that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd watched too many shows about powerful people having affairs in corner offices. Everything was white and chrome and glass, sterile in a way that probably cost a fortune to achieve. The receptionist, a young woman with glasses and an expression that said she'd seen some things working here, looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" "Gavin Miles," I said. "I'm here for the board meeting." Her eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Miles." "Yes. They're expecting you." "Conference room B, down the hall, and to the left." "Thank you," I said, and walked past her desk with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're about to ruin someone's day in the most legal way possible. The office was already buzzing with that Monday morning energy. People carrying coffee, having conversations about their weekends, completely unaware that they were about to witness corporate history. I passed Clara's office on the way to the conference room. The door was closed, but through the glass wall, I could see the black tulip-side scent sitting on her desk in a vase. She was standing next to them, staring at the card with an expression that looked somewhere between confused and panicked. Good. Let her panic. She'd earned it. Conference room B was exactly what you'd expect from a company that charged $500 for a handbag, minimalist furniture, a table that could seat 20 people but probably cost more than a car, and a massive screen on the wall for presentations. Mark was already there, setting up his laptop, wearing his own version of the power suit. When he saw me, he grinned like a kid on Christmas morning. "You ready for this?" he asked. "I've been ready since Friday night," I said. "Let's burn this place down." "Figuratively," he said. "Let's figuratively burn it down." "I have to say that as your lawyer." "Figuratively." I agreed, though we both knew what I meant. The board members started filing in around 9:50. There were 7 of them, various executives and investors who'd bought into Arden and Company over the years. I recognized a few faces from the Christmas party, people who'd been laughing when Clara made her announcement. They looked at me with expressions ranging from confusion to concern, probably wondering why the humiliated husband was crashing their Monday morning meeting. Then Clara walked in with Eli, and the temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. She froze when she saw me, her face going through about 5 different emotions in 3 seconds: surprise, confusion, anger, fear, and finally settling on this weird fake confidence that didn't reach her eyes. Eli just looked uncomfortable, like he'd shown up to a party and realized he was the only one in costume. "Gavin," Clara said, her voice doing that thing where she tried to sound casual but came across as defensive. "What are you doing here?" I smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile a shark probably makes before it bites. "I'm here for the meeting. Please, everyone, have a seat." "You can't just," Clara started, but Tara Morrison, the CFO, cut her off. "Actually, Clara, he can." Tara was looking at her tablet, her expression shifting from professional confusion to professional concern. "According to the shareholder registry, Gavin Miles is listed as, oh my what?" Clara said, still standing, her hand gripping the back of a chair like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "Perhaps we should start the meeting," I said pleasantly, taking a seat at the head of the table like I owned the place. Because I did. "Mark, would you like to present?" Mark opened his laptop and the screen behind me lit up with the title slide, Arden and Company, Shareholder Structure and Proposed Organizational Changes. He was enjoying this way too much, but honestly, so was I. "As of this morning," Mark began, pulling up the first chart, "the shareholder breakdown of Arden and Company is as follows." He clicked, and a pie chart appeared showing ownership percentages. My name sat at the top with 52.3% in bold letters that might as well have been in neon. Gavin Miles is the majority shareholder and controlling interest in this company. The room went silent. Not the kind of silence where people are being polite, but the kind where everyone's brain is trying to process information that doesn't make sense. Clara's face had gone from confused to pale to something that looked like she'd just watched her entire life flash before her eyes and realized she'd made a terrible, irreversible mistake. "That's not possible," she said, but her voice had lost all its confidence. "I would know if." "You did know," I said, leaning back in my chair with the kind of casual authority that comes from holding all the cards. 6 years ago, I invested $350,000 in this company to help fund your executive position. That investment made me a shareholder. Over the past 18 months, I've been quietly acquiring additional shares through legal means. Everything is documented, everything is legitimate, and everything is now a matter of public record." Eli had the good sense to look like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Clara looked like she was going to either cry or throw something, and I genuinely wasn't sure which I was hoping for. "Why?" she asked, and for the first time since Friday night, I saw actual emotion on her face instead of that practiced corporate mask. "Why did I invest in your company?" I said. "Because I believed in you." "Why did I continue investing?" "Because I believe in protecting my assets." "Why am I here now?" I leaned forward, dropping the casual act. "Because you humiliated me in front of 50 people, announced your affair like it was a corporate achievement, and apparently forgot that actions have consequences." Tara cleared her throat. "So what exactly are you proposing, Mr. Miles?" I nodded at Mark, who pulled up the next slide. "I'm proposing several organizational changes that I believe will improve company performance and address certain ethical concerns. First, I'd like to open a formal investigation into any relationships between employees that may violate company policy regarding workplace conduct." Eli's face went from uncomfortable to absolutely terrified. Apparently, having an affair with your boss's wife was bad enough, but having an affair with an employee when you're in management was a fireable offense. Who knew? Oh right, everyone knew. That's literally in every employee handbook ever written. Second, I continued, I'm proposing the immediate removal of Clara Miles from her position as VP of Brand Development, effective today, pending the results of the investigation into workplace ethics violations. You can't do this, Clara said, but there was no strength behind it. She knew I could. She was just hoping I wouldn't. I can actually, I said. I'm the majority shareholder. I have the authority to propose restructuring, and the board has the authority to vote on it. So let's vote. All in favor of opening an ethics investigation. Hands went up around the table. Not immediately, but one by one. Board members raised their hands because they knew which way the wind was blowing. When you're the majority shareholder, people tend to agree with you unless they want to find themselves out of a job. And all in favor of removing Clara Miles from her executive position pending investigation results? More hands. Clara's face had gone from pale to red, tears forming in her eyes, but not quite falling because she was still trying to maintain some shred of dignity in front of her colleagues. Motion passes, I said calmly. Clara, you'll need to clear out your office by end of business today. HR will be in touch regarding your severance package, which will be, I assure you, exactly what your contract stipulates and not a penny more. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Board members asking questions, Mark providing documentation, Tara looking at her tablet like it held the answers to life's mysteries. Clara stood there for a moment, looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time, and then she walked out without a word. Eli followed her, probably to offer comfort or excuses or whatever it is that homewreckers offer when the home they wreck collapses on top of them. I sat there at the head of the table, in my perfect suit, feeling like I'd just won a game I didn't even know I was playing until someone changed all the rules. The room smelled like expensive coffee and the faint scent of burning bridges, and honestly, it smelled like victory. You know how they say news travels fast? That's a lie. News doesn't travel fast, it teleports. It quantum leaps across space and time. It moves at speeds that would make physicists weep and reconsider everything they thought they knew about the universe. By the time I left that boardroom at 10:30 on Monday morning, the entire 7th floor knew what had happened. By 11, the whole building knew. By noon, Clara holding Eli's hand, her announcement about me being just for appearances, the room's laughter, and most importantly, my face. My perfectly calm, eerily composed face as I raised my champagne glass, took a sip, and walked out without a word. The comments section was absolutely losing its mind. This man's face says, I'm about to ruin your whole career, Skull. The calm ones are always the most dangerous. She's gonna regret this so hard, LMYOLO. My man didn't even flinch. King behavior. Plot twist. He owns the company. Calling it now. That last comment had been posted 2 days ago, and someone had replied this morning. Update. He does own the company. He fired her today. I work there. Yeah, I said to the woman. That's me. Dude, she said, and I appreciated that she went with dude instead of something more formal. You're like a legend right now. What you did this morning is all over Twitter. Someone leaked the boardroom meeting. Of course someone had leaked it. You can't have that kind of drama without someone recording it on their phone under the table or remembering enough details to post a play-by-play thread. I thanked her, ordered my sandwich, turkey, because I was feeling traditional, and sat down to scroll through my phone while I ate. Twitter was an absolute dumpster fire, which meant it was also absolutely entertaining. Someone had created a hashtag #SilentSavageHusband. It was trending. Number 3 in the United States, right below some political scandal and above a celebrity pregnancy announcement. I'd somehow become a meme, a cautionary tale, and a folk hero all at the same time. The tweets were golden. This man waited 3 days to destroy her. That's not revenge, that's strategic warfare. She really cheated on him, announced it publicly, and forgot he owned the company? That's not just stupid, that's Olympic-level stupid. Imagine laughing at someone on Friday and getting fired by them on Monday. Couldn't be me. The way he just smiled and left the party. Cinema. Pure cinema. There were also, predictably, people who thought I was a monster. Using your financial power to punish your wife for leaving you is abusive, one tweet read. Another said, this is why we need to dismantle capitalism. Rich men weaponizing ownership against women. I wanted to reply and point out that Clara had cheated, humiliated me publicly, and violated company ethics policies, but Mark had already texted me, "Do not engage with social media. Let them talk. Your silence is more powerful." He was right, of course. He was annoyingly right about most things, which is why I paid him a stupid amount of money to be my lawyer. Around 2 o'clock, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mr. Miles? This is Jennifer Park from Channel 5 News. We're doing a story about what happened at Arden and Company this morning, and we'd love to get your perspective." A news story. Fantastic. My marriage implosion had gone from social media gossip to actual journalism. "I'm going to have to decline," I said. "This is a private matter." "But sir, the story is already public. The video from Friday night has millions of views, and reports of this morning's board meeting are all over social media. Don't you want to share your side?" I thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. "Sure," I said. "Here's my side. I came, I invested, I reclaimed. Merry Christmas." I hung up before she could ask follow-up questions, but apparently that was enough because by 4 o'clock, that quote was everywhere. Someone had turned it into a graphic with my face photoshopped onto various victorious historical figures. Napoleon, Rocky Balboa, that famous photo of Muhammad Ali standing over his opponent. The internet was having way too much fun with my personal tragedy. Meanwhile, back at Arden and Company, things were apparently descending into absolute chaos. I knew this because Tara called me at 3:30, her voice strained in a way that suggested she'd been dealing with crisis management for hours. "Gavin, we need to talk about the situation here," she said. "What situation?" I asked innocently, though I knew exactly what situation. "The building is surrounded by reporters. Our customer service line is being flooded with calls, some people supporting Clara, some people supporting you, all of them asking for statements. 3 employees have already quit because they can't work in this environment. The company Instagram is getting bombarded with comments on every single post, including ads from 2 years ago. And Clara is in her office refusing to pack up her things until you agree to speak with her. Tell her she has until 5 o'clock, or security will pack them for her," I said calmly. "As for the reporters, release a statement saying that Arden and Company takes workplace ethics seriously and is conducting a thorough investigation. As for the employees who quit, good riddance. Anyone who quits over workplace policy enforcement probably wasn't a great employee anyway." "Gavin," Tara said, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "I've worked here for 8 years. I've never seen anything like this." "Neither have I," I said. "But here we are. How are sales?" There was a pause. "Actually up. Way up. Apparently, publicity, even messy publicity, sells handbags. Our website traffic is up 400%. I laughed. I couldn't help it. "So what you're telling me is that my marriage falling apart is good for business?" I mean, I wouldn't phrase it like that in a board meeting, but yes. People love drama, and they love it even more when they can participate by buying things. "Capitalism is wild," I said. "Keep me updated on the numbers." By the time 5 o'clock rolled around, I was back home with whiskers, watching the news coverage of my own life like it was a reality show I hadn't auditioned for. Channel 5 had indeed run the story, complete with my "I came, I invested, I reclaimed" quote displayed in bold letters over footage of the Arden and Company building. They'd interviewed random people on the street, asking them what they thought about the situation. "I think he's justified," one woman said. She humiliated him publicly. He responded professionally. "I think they're both messy," a college-aged guy said. "But like, entertaining messy. I'd watch this show. This is why I'm never getting married." A third person contributed helpfully. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Texts from people I hadn't spoken to in years, all suddenly interested in my well-being now that I was internet famous. Old college friends, distant cousins, my barber, the guy who sold me my car 3 years ago. Everyone wanted to offer support or get the inside scoop or just let me know they'd seen the videos. The only person who hadn't contacted me was Clara. Well, she'd tried 43 calls in the past 6 hours, but I hadn't answered any of them. What was there to say? She'd made her choice on Friday night. I'd made mine on Monday morning. Everything else was just noise. Around 7, Mark sent me a text with a link to a Twitter thread. Someone had done a deep dive into the entire situation, pulling together the Friday night video, reports from the Monday board meeting, analysis of company ownership structures, and screenshots of Clara's Instagram post. It read like investigative journalism meets gossip column, and it had been retweeted 50,000 times. The thread ended with, "Moral of the story, don't humiliate someone who signs your checks. Also, maybe don't announce your affair at a work party. Just a thought." I texted Mark back. "Should I be worried about this level of attention?" He replied immediately, "Worried? Dude, you're trending above a Kardashian. This is the best free publicity you could ask for. Just don't do anything stupid, don't talk to reporters without me present, and for the love of God, stay off Twitter." Sound advice, which I immediately ignored by creating a burner Twitter account just to scroll through the hashtag. I wasn't going to engage, but I was definitely going to watch the internet collectively lose its mind over my life. One tweet caught my attention. This man really said, "You want a divorce? Cool, you're fired too, and honestly? Iconic." I wasn't sure if I'd ever wanted a divorce, honestly. I'd been pretty happy in my marriage right up until it exploded in my face. But if Clara wanted to rewrite our history as her finally being authentic and finding real love, then fine. I could rewrite history too. Mine just came with better documentation and controlling shares in a multi-million-dollar company. My phone buzzed again, another call from Clara. I declined it and turned on Do Not Disturb. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new drama, probably new viral videos. But tonight I was going to finish my whiskey, watch Whiskers chase a toy mouse around the living room, and enjoy the fact that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win. Or at least the guys who read their investment contracts carefully. 3 days after the boardroom apocalypse, Arden and Company was experiencing what business analysts would politely call organizational turbulence, and what everyone else would call a complete dumpster fire with excellent lighting. I knew this because Tara had started calling me at increasingly desperate intervals, and each call painted a picture of corporate chaos that would have been concerning if it wasn't also deeply, deeply satisfying. "The suppliers are freezing contracts," she told me on Wednesday morning, her voice tight with stress. Apparently, they're concerned about the company's stability given all the negative publicity. "What negative publicity?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Sales are up, aren't they?" "Yes, but publicity and stability are different things. When your VP gets fired for having an affair that went viral, suppliers start wondering if their invoices will get paid." She had a point. "Tell them the company is under new management direction and all existing contracts will be honored. Send them documentation of our cash reserves. Show them we're more stable now than we were a week ago." "Are we?" Tara asked, and I could hear the genuine question underneath the professional tone. "Absolutely," I said. "We just removed the people who were creating workplace drama and violating ethics policies. That's not instability. That's course correction." The suppliers weren't the only ones panicking. By Thursday, Tara called again with a new crisis. Investors were requesting emergency meetings. Apparently, 3 of the smaller shareholders wanted to discuss the direction of the company and leadership concerns, which was corporate speak for, "We're nervous about the guy who just fired his wife, and we want to make sure he's not going to tank our investment." I agreed to meet with them Friday afternoon, mostly because watching people squirm while trying to be professionally polite was becoming my new favorite hobby. The meeting was held in the same conference room where I dropped the ownership bomb on Monday, which felt appropriate. Full circle, poetic justice, all that good stuff. The 3 investors, 2 men in their 50s and a woman in her 40s, all wearing variations of expensive business casual, sat across from me with expressions that tried to project confidence, but mostly projected concern. One of them, a guy named Richard who apparently owned 6% of the company, cleared his throat and launched into what was clearly a prepared speech. "Mr. Miles, we want to start by saying we respect your authority as majority shareholder, but we have some concerns about the recent events." "Events," I repeated. "You mean me firing my wife for violating company ethics policies?" "Well, when you put it that way. How else would I put it?" I asked. "She had an affair with a direct report, announced it at a company function, and created a hostile work environment. Would you prefer I kept her on staff so she could continue violating HR policies?" The woman, whose name was Patricia, jumped in. "We're more concerned about the publicity. The viral videos, the media coverage, the social media attention. It's a lot of exposure for a company that typically maintains a low profile." "True," I acknowledged. "But have you seen the sales numbers? We're up 42% this week. Our website crashed twice from traffic. 3 influencers have organically posted about our products without being paid because they want to be associated with the drama. We've gotten more brand awareness in 4 days than we got in the past 2 years of marketing campaigns. Richard shifted uncomfortably. But what happens when the attention dies down? What's the long-term strategy? I leaned back in my chair, the same chair where I'd sat 4 days ago watching Clara's world crumble. The long-term strategy is the same as it always was. Make quality products, maintain ethical workplace standards, and grow the business. The only thing that's changed is that we now have a much larger audience aware we exist. That's not a problem. That's an opportunity. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes of them asking politely concerned questions and me providing calm, rational answers that made it clear I knew exactly what I was doing. By the end, they seemed mollified, or at least resigned to the fact that I wasn't going anywhere and neither was my controlling interest in the company. But the real chaos wasn't coming from suppliers or investors, it was coming from HR. By Friday afternoon, I'd received a report that made me laugh out loud in my home office, startling Whiskers from her nap. The HR department had received 14 resignation letters in 4 days. 14. In a company of 87 employees, that was significant. I called Tara. Tell me about these resignations. Most of them are citing uncomfortable work environment or concerns about company direction, she said. A few are from Clara's team, which isn't surprising. 2 are from marketing, which is Eli's department. And 3 are from people who apparently just don't like drama and decided this was too much. The vibe was off, I said, remembering what she'd mentioned earlier. Exactly. The vibe was off. Good, I said, and I could hear her surprise through the phone. Good. Tara, think about it. The people who are quitting are either loyal to Clara, complicit in the ethics violations, or the kind of people who prioritize vibes over workplace professionalism. Those aren't people we want representing the company anyway. Let them go, post the job openings, and I guarantee we'll get better applicants who actually want to work somewhere with clear ethical standards. There was a pause. You know what? That actually makes sense. I'm occasionally wise, I said. Don't spread it around. The real kicker came on Saturday, when Eli officially resigned. Not just from Arden and Company, but apparently from Nashville's corporate scene entirely. According to the resignation letter that somehow got leaked to me. Thank you, anonymous employee who clearly disliked him. He was pursuing personal growth opportunities and taking time to reflect on his values. Translation: he'd been fired from every job he applied to because nobody wants to hire the guy from the viral affair video. Turns out, being famous for workplace misconduct isn't actually great for your career prospects. Who knew? I heard through the corporate gossip chain, which moved faster than any official communication ever could, that he'd taken a job at a smoothie bar in East Nashville. Not managing the smoothie bar, working at the smoothie bar, making smoothies for people who probably recognized him from the videos and gave him pitying looks while ordering their acai bowls. The irony was almost too perfect. The guy who'd helped destroy my marriage was now blending kale and bananas for minimum wage plus tips, probably wondering where exactly his life had gone wrong. I would have felt bad for him if he hadn't literally participated in publicly humiliating me, but my sympathy reserves were currently running at empty. Clara, meanwhile, had gone completely silent. No more Instagram posts, no more texts, no more calls. Her social media accounts had gone private, and according to people who still followed her, she hadn't posted anything since Monday. The woman who'd announced her affair like it was a promotional campaign had apparently discovered the value of shutting up, which was probably the first smart decision she'd made in months. As I sat in my home office on Saturday evening, reviewing the financial reports that showed Arden and Company posting record profits despite, or perhaps because of, the chaos, I realized something funny. Clara's grand gesture of authenticity, her public declaration of real love, her dramatic announcement that I was just for appearances, it had all backfired spectacularly. She'd wanted to be free, to be authentic, to start fresh with Eli. Instead, she'd lost her job, her reputation, and her relationship with the guy she'd thrown everything away for. Meanwhile, I'd gained control of a profitable company, become an internet folk hero, and discovered that revenge didn't have to be loud to be effective. Sometimes it just had to be patient. I should have seen the lawsuit coming. Actually, scratch that. I did see it coming. Mark had predicted it within 48 hours of the boardroom meeting, and he was off by exactly 12 hours. On the following Tuesday, exactly 10 days after the Christmas party that started this whole mess, I was served with legal papers while having coffee at my favorite downtown cafe. The process server at least had the decency to look apologetic about interrupting my cappuccino. Clara was suing me for emotional manipulation, abuse of power, and my personal favorite, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit was 23 pages long, which seemed excessive for someone whose primary complaint was that I'd exercised my legal rights as a shareholder after she'd publicly humiliated me. I read through it while finishing my coffee, occasionally laughing out loud at particularly dramatic passages that made me sound like a corporate supervillain instead of a guy who'd just defended himself. According to Clara's legal team, and she'd apparently hired a big firm, which meant she was either spending her savings or someone was backing her, I had weaponized my financial position and created a hostile environment designed to punish her for exercising her personal autonomy. Personal autonomy. That's what we were calling publicly announced workplace affairs now. The English language was truly a beautiful, flexible thing. I forwarded the lawsuit to Mark with a single text. She can't be serious. He called me 30 seconds later, laughing so hard I could barely understand him. Oh, she's serious. This is the most desperate Hail Mary I've seen in years. Her lawyers are either incredibly optimistic or incredibly expensive. Can she win? I asked, though I was pretty sure I knew the answer. Win? Gavin. She confessed to the affair on Instagram. There's video evidence of her announcing it at a work party. She violated company ethics policies that are clearly documented in the employee handbook. You followed proper legal procedures for shareholder actions. The only thing you're guilty of is having good lawyers and better timing. He paused. Also, I love that she's claiming emotional distress. The woman who publicly humiliated you is claiming you hurt her feelings by following corporate governance procedures. That's like punching someone and then suing them because your hand hurts. The court date was set for 3 weeks out, which gave me plenty of time to prepare and also plenty of time to watch Clara's legal strategy fall apart in real time. Because here's the thing about filing a lawsuit in the age of social media. Everyone has opinions, and they're all going to share them immediately. Within hours of the lawsuit becoming public record, because of course it became public, nothing in my life was private anymore. The internet had thoughts. So many thoughts. The hashtag Clara versus Gavin started trending, which made our divorce sound like a boxing match or a reality show finale. Honestly, at this point, it might as well have been both. She's suing him for emotional distress? Ma'am, you caused the distress, one tweet said. Imagine cheating, announcing it publicly, getting fired for ethics violations, and then being surprised when there are consequences. I simply cannot relate, another added. My favorite was, this woman really said, how dare you fire me from the company you own after I publicly humiliated you, and expected sympathy. The audacity is almost impressive. Even legal analysts were weighing in, appearing on morning shows to discuss the case, like it was landmark litigation instead of my personal nightmare turned public spectacle. One lawyer on Good Morning America said, this lawsuit has almost no chance of success. Employment law is clear. Shareholders have the right to make personnel decisions, especially when there are documented policy violations. The 3 weeks leading up to the court date were a masterclass in watching someone dig their own grave while insisting they were building a fortress. Clara gave an interview to a local news station where she claimed I'd always been controlling and had used money to manipulate her. The interview would have been more effective if the reporter hadn't immediately followed up with, but didn't he invest in your career? And weren't the shares purchased legally? Clara's response, a flustered, that's not the point, became a meme within hours. Mark and I spent 2 days preparing for court, though honestly, the preparation felt unnecessary. We had documentation for everything. The original investment agreement, the share purchase records, the company ethics policies, the board meeting minutes, and oh yes, the video of Clara announcing her affair at a work party that 4.2 million people had now watched. If this case went to trial, it would be the legal equivalent of shooting fish in a barrel, if the fish had already jumped out of the barrel and flopped around on the deck while filming themselves. The day of the hearing arrived with the kind of crisp winter clarity that made everything feel sharp and well-defined. I wore another one of my power suits, navy this time, because I was feeling patriotic about justice, and met Mark outside the courthouse. There were reporters everywhere, which I'd expected, and a small crowd of people who'd apparently taken time off work to watch my divorce proceedings like they were a sporting event. "Mr. Miles, do you have any comment?" a reporter shouted. "Justice speaks for itself," I said, which sounded good and gave them a quote without actually saying anything meaningful. Inside, the courtroom was exactly what you'd expect, wood paneling, uncomfortable benches, and that particular smell of old documents and broken dreams. Clara was already there with her legal team, 3 lawyers in expensive suits who looked like they were mentally calculating how much they could bill for this disaster. She didn't look at me when I walked in, which was fine. I wasn't particularly interested in making eye contact with her either. Judge Harriet Doyle entered, and everyone stood. She was in her early 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun and glasses that suggested she'd seen every variation of human stupidity and wasn't impressed by any of it. I liked her immediately. The proceedings were surprisingly quick. Clara's lawyers presented their case, arguing that I'd used my position of power to retaliate against her for ending our marriage. They made me sound like a Bond villain, which would have been flattering if it wasn't so ridiculous. Then Mark stood up, and I watched him do what he did best, demolish arguments with facts and documentation. He walked the judge through the timeline, the original investment, the subsequent share purchases, the company ethics policies, the board meeting procedures. He showed the Instagram post where Clara announced the affair. He played a clip from the Christmas party video. Judge Doyle watched everything with an expression that suggested she was rapidly losing patience with Clara's legal team. When Mark finished, she looked at Clara's lead attorney and said, "Counselor, do you have any evidence that Mr. Miles acted outside his legal rights as a shareholder?" "Your Honor, the emotional context." I asked about legal rights, not emotional context. Did Mr. Miles violate any laws or regulations in his actions as a shareholder? "No, Your Honor, but did your client violate company ethics policies by engaging in a relationship with a subordinate and announcing it at a company function?" There was a long pause. "Technically, yes, but... And is there documented evidence of this violation, including your client's own social media posts and video footage?" Another pause. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Doyle removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose like she was physically tired of this case. "Ma'am," she said, looking directly at Clara, "your husband, excuse me, your soon-to-be ex-husband, legally owned the company where you worked. You engaged in behavior that violated company policy, which you admitted to publicly, including on social media. He followed proper procedures to address those violations. I don't see a case here. I see consequences for your actions, which is not the same thing as emotional manipulation." She banged her gavel. "Case dismissed. Next time, maybe don't confess to ethics violations on Instagram." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Clara's face went from pale to red, and one of her lawyers looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Mark was grinning so wide I thought his face might split in half. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us immediately. I stopped on the steps, feeling generous and also slightly vindictive, and decided to give them what they wanted. "I love when justice comes with a receipt," I said, and Mark nearly choked trying not to laugh. The quote was on Twitter before we'd even reached the parking lot. Within an hour, I was trending again. Hashtag Justice with Receipts competing with hashtag Silent Savage Husband for top hashtag honors. Someone had already made t-shirts. As I drove home, my phone buzzing with congratulatory texts from people I'd forgotten existed, I realized something. This whole mess, the affair, the humiliation, the lawsuit, had been Clara's attempt to rewrite our story with her as the hero finally breaking free. Instead, she'd written herself as the cautionary tale, and me as the guy who proved that sometimes the best revenge is just letting people face the natural consequences of their own terrible decisions. Also, good lawyers. Good lawyers help too. By the time February rolled around, I'd achieved a level of fame I never asked for and definitely didn't deserve. I wasn't movie star famous or even reality TV famous. I was internet famous, which is simultaneously more and less significant than regular fame. It meant I couldn't go to Starbucks without someone recognizing me, but also that I'd probably be completely forgotten in 6 months when the internet found a new protagonist to obsess over. The memes were relentless. Someone had photoshopped my face onto everything from historical paintings to movie posters. There was one where I was Napoleon crossing the Alps, except instead of a horse, I was riding a giant share certificate. Another showed me as the "This is fine" dog sitting in a burning room, except the room was labeled "My Marriage," and I was holding a document labeled 52% ownership. The internet's creativity was both impressive and deeply weird. But the weirdest part wasn't the memes or the viral videos or even the 3 podcast interviews I'd politely declined. The weirdest part was how it affected my regular life. People treated me differently now, like I was some kind of folk hero instead of just a guy who'd protected his assets after getting publicly humiliated. Case in point, my barber gave me a discount. I walked into the same barbershop I'd been going to for 5 years, and Tony, who'd been cutting my hair since I moved to Nashville, refused to charge me full price. "Nah, man," he said, waving away my credit card. "Consider it the revenge haircut. On the house. Well, half on the house. $20 instead of 40. Tony, you don't have to." I saw the video, Gav. We all saw the video. What you did. That was legendary. The way you just smiled and walked out. Cold. Then coming back with the ownership papers. Ice cold. You deserve a discount just for style points. So apparently I was now getting discounted services for publicly dismantling my wife's career. The world was a strange place, and I was just living in it. The real test of my newfound fame came when I went to the grocery store on a random Tuesday afternoon. I was in the cereal aisle, because yes, I'm 41 and still eat Lucky Charms, sue me, when a woman in her 30s approached me with her phone out. "Excuse me, are you Gavin Miles?" I considered lying, but at this point, what was the point? "Yeah, that's me." Her face lit up like I'd just told her she'd won the lottery. "Oh my God, I have to tell you, what you did was amazing. My ex cheated on me 3 years ago, and I wish I'd had your level of preparation. Can I get a photo?" So I took a photo with a stranger in the cereal aisle, both of us holding boxes of cereal and smiling like we were old friends instead of 2 people who'd met 30 seconds ago bonding over infidelity and corporate revenge. She posted it immediately with the caption, "Met the legend himself. Hashtag silent savage husband, hashtag king behavior." This became a pattern. I couldn't go anywhere without someone recognizing me, wanting to share their own cheating ex story, or asking for advice on protecting their assets. I became an accidental expert on prenups and investment strategies, which was hilarious because 6 weeks ago, I'd been a regular guy who thought his marriage was solid. The media attention eventually died down, as media attention always does, but I'd become a permanent fixture in certain corners of the internet. There were Reddit threads analyzing my strategy, TikTok accounts dedicated to relationship revenge stories that always referenced mine as the gold standard, and at least 4 different YouTube video essays with titles like "The Psychology of Strategic Revenge," a case study that used my situation as the primary example. Meanwhile, Clara had basically vanished from public life. Her social media accounts were still private, and according to mutual friends who apparently had no sense of loyalty or discretion, she'd moved in with her parents in the suburbs. The woman who'd been VP of brand development at a luxury fashion company was now living in her childhood bedroom, which felt like the kind of poetic justice you couldn't write without being accused of being too heavy-handed. But the really satisfying part came about 6 weeks after the court case, when Clara tried to do a tell-all interview. Some local lifestyle magazine had apparently decided that her side of the story would make good content, probably hoping to generate some of that sweet controversy traffic. The interview was scheduled, promoted, and according to the internet gossip mill, Clara had spent hours preparing her talking points about emotional abuse and financial manipulation. The interview aired on their YouTube channel on a Thursday evening, and I watched it with Mark and a bottle of wine that cost more than it should have, but felt appropriate for the occasion. Clara looked tired but determined, sitting in some tastefully decorated studio with soft lighting that was clearly meant to make her look sympathetic. The host, a woman named Rebecca, who did that particular brand of empathetic journalism where every question sounds like therapy, started with softball questions. "Tell us about what happened in your marriage." Clara launched into her prepared speech about how she'd felt suffocated and controlled, and how finding Eli had been about rediscovering herself. It was the same narrative she'd been pushing since the beginning, and it might have worked if Rebecca had stopped there. But then Rebecca did something beautiful. She played a clip from the Christmas party video, the full clip, including Clara laughing at her own announcement and the room's reaction to my humiliation. "Clara," Rebecca said, her voice still empathetic but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "In this video, you're laughing. The room is laughing. Your husband is standing there being publicly humiliated, and you're smiling. How do you reconcile that with your narrative about being the victim?" Clara's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, confusion, defensiveness, before settling on something that looked like she'd just realized she'd walked into a trap. That was taken out of context." "What context?" Rebecca asked. "This is the full 2-minute clip." The interview went downhill from there. Rebecca asked about the Instagram post, about the ethics violations, about why Clara thought it was appropriate to announce an affair at a work party. Every answer Clara gave made her sound worse, more defensive, less sympathetic. By the end, even the lighting couldn't save her. The comments section was brutal. "She really thought this would help her case, LMAO," was one of the top comments. Another said, "The interviewer ate her up. This is what real journalism looks like." My personal favorite was, "She walked into this interview like it was a chance to tell her story and walked out having just proved his point." Mark paused the video and raised his wine glass. To Clara, who just did more damage to her own reputation in 30 minutes than we could have done in a year. To Clara, I agreed, clinking glasses. May she continue to be her own worst enemy. Public sympathy, which had been marginally on her side in some circles, mostly people who believed in supporting women without actually examining what they were supporting, evaporated faster than my respect for her judgment. The narrative shifted completely. I was no longer the vengeful ex-husband with too much power. I was the guy who'd been publicly humiliated and had responded with restraint and legal action instead of actual revenge. Even my own family, who'd been suspiciously quiet during the initial drama, started reaching out. My mom called to tell me she'd always had concerns about Clara, which was news to me since she'd seemed perfectly fine with her at our wedding. My sister sent a text that just said, "I told you she was sketchy," even though she definitely had not told me that. Everyone suddenly had opinions they'd been holding back, now feeling safe to share them since public opinion had firmly landed on my side. The weirdest message came from Eli. Yes, that Eli. He sent an email to my personal account, which meant he'd kept it from when we'd exchanged information for work events years ago, with the subject line, "I'm sorry." The email was 3 paragraphs of rambling apologies about getting caught up and not meaning for things to go this far, and hoping we could move past this. He didn't mention the smoothie bar job, but the desperation in his tone suggested things weren't going well in his new career path. I deleted it without responding. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. They're better off as wreckage that serves as a warning to others. As winter turned to spring, life started feeling normal again, or at least a new version of normal where I occasionally got recognized at restaurants and had a Wikipedia page that someone had created without my permission. The internet had mostly moved on to new dramas, new viral moments, new protagonists in the endless soap opera of human behavior. But I remained a cautionary tale, a legend, a meme. The guy who'd smiled and walked out of his own humiliation only to return with paperwork and perfect timing. And honestly, I was okay with that. 6 months after the Christmas party that launched 1,000 memes, Arden and company posted record profits. Not just good profits or decent profits, but the kind of numbers that made financial analysts send congratulatory emails and investors suddenly remember they'd always believed in the company's potential. The quarterly report showed a 47% increase in revenue, a 32% jump in online sales, and brand recognition that had tripled since December. Turns out, viral drama was better than any marketing campaign money could buy. Who knew that publicly firing your cheating wife would make people want to buy overpriced handbags? Capitalism worked in mysterious and occasionally hilarious ways. Tara had officially been promoted to CEO after a board vote that was so unanimous it was almost boring. She'd earned it, not just by holding the company together during the chaos, but by actually improving operations, streamlining processes, and turning potential disaster into demonstrable success. I stayed on as chairman of the board, which meant I got to make big-picture decisions without dealing with daily operations, which was exactly the level of involvement I wanted. We were in Tara's new office, formerly Clara's office, though all traces of her had been removed and replaced with Tara's more practical aesthetic. reviewing the quarterly numbers when my phone buzzed with an email notification. I glanced at it and actually laughed out loud. "What?" Tara asked, looking up from her laptop. "Clara just sent me an email," I said, staring at my phone like it had suddenly grown a second screen. Subject line, "Can we talk?" Tara raised an eyebrow. "Is this the first time she's contacted you since the lawsuit?" "Yep." 6 months of silence, and now she wants to talk. I'm almost impressed by the timing. We just posted record profits. The story's finally died down, and suddenly she remembers I exist. Are you going to respond? I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Absolutely. I opened my email and typed out a response that felt both professional and perfectly petty. "For any inquiries, please contact our customer service team at support@ardenko.com. Response time is typically 3 to 5 business days. Thank you for your patience." I hit send and showed Tara, who laughed so hard she had to set down her coffee to avoid spilling it. "That's cold. I love it." "I'm not being cold," I said innocently. "I'm being professional." She wanted to be treated like everyone else when she announced her affair at a work party. Now she gets treated like everyone else, like a customer with a complaint. The rest of the day continued in that vein of satisfying normalcy. We discussed expansion plans, reviewed marketing strategies, and debated whether to open a second retail location in Memphis. It was boring, professional work, and after 6 months of drama, boring felt luxurious. I was finally just a guy doing business instead of a guy whose business had become public entertainment. That evening, Mark came over to celebrate. We'd made it a tradition over the past few months. Whenever something particularly ridiculous happened in the ongoing saga of my life, we'd get together with expensive alcohol and toast to the absurdity of it all. Tonight's occasion was the quarterly report and Clara's pathetic email, both of which deserved recognition. "To record profits," Mark said, raising his glass of champagne that cost more than some people's car payments. "To record profits," I echoed, "and to emotional damage being paid in dividends." We clinked glasses, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Genuine contentment. Not happiness exactly. That felt like too strong a word for a situation that had started with public humiliation, but something close to peace. Like I'd finally turned a corner and could see the road ahead instead of just the wreckage behind me. "You know what's funny?" Mark said, settling into one of my leather chairs with Whiskers immediately claiming his lap. 6 months ago, you were the guy whose wife announced an affair at a Christmas party. Now you're the guy who turned a personal disaster into a business success story. That's not just revenge, that's legacy. "I don't know about legacy," I said. "I'm still mostly known for a viral video and a really good lawyer." "Hey, I was excellent in that courtroom," Mark said. "But don't sell yourself short. You played this perfectly. You could have made a scene at the party, didn't. You could have badmouthed Clara on social media, didn't. You could have used your ownership to be actually vindictive instead of just enforcing workplace policies, didn't. You took the high road, and the high road happened to have better views and bigger profits." He wasn't wrong. I'd been angry, sure. Hurt, absolutely. But I'd channeled all of that into doing things the right way. Legal, professional, by the book. And somehow, that had been more effective than any dramatic revenge plot could have been. "What do you think Clara's doing right now?" Mark asked, scratching Whiskers behind the ears while she purred like a small engine. "According to the last update I got from mutual friends with questionable loyalty, she's teaching yoga." Mark nearly spit out his champagne. "She's what?" "Teaching yoga. Apparently, she's on some kind of journey to rediscover herself and find inner peace. Which is code for I destroyed my career and now I'm trying to rebrand as spiritually enlightened." "Does she even like yoga?" "She used to complain about it constantly. Said it was boring and made her knees hurt. But I guess when you tank your professional reputation, you take what jobs you can get." We both sat there for a moment, contemplating the irony of Clara, former VP of a luxury fashion company, woman who'd announced her affair with confidence and flair, now teaching downward dog to suburban moms in a strip mall studio. The universe had a sense of humor, and apparently, it was a fan of poetic justice. "I hope she finds what she's looking for," Mark said, and he sounded almost sincere. "Really?" I asked. "You hope she finds inner peace?" "Sure," he said. "Preferably far, far away from you and anything you own or operate. I'm magnanimous like that." My phone buzzed again, another email from Clara. I opened it and read, "Please, Gavin. I just want to talk. 5 minutes." I owe you an explanation. I showed it to Mark, who rolled his eyes. What are you going to say? Nothing, I said, deleting the email. She had 7 years to talk to me. She had multiple opportunities to have honest conversations about our marriage. Instead, she chose to have an affair and announce it at a work party. I don't owe her closure, and I definitely don't need her explanation. Closure is overrated anyway, Mark agreed. You know what's better than closure? Quarterly reports showing 47% revenue growth. You know what's even better? I said, pulling up something on my phone. This. I showed him a news article from that afternoon, former Arden and Company. Executive launches wellness brand. The article featured a photo of Clara in yoga clothes, sitting in lotus position, with a caption about her new business teaching authentic living and finding your truth. Mark read it and started laughing. She's monetizing the aftermath of her own scandal. That's actually kind of brilliant in a deeply shameless way. It won't work, I said confidently. Her brand is built on being authentic after leaving a controlling marriage. But everyone's seen the videos. Everyone knows what actually happened. You can't rebrand yourself as a victim when there's literal footage of you being the villain. Still, Mark said, you've got to admire the audacity. Most people would have moved to a different state and changed their names. She's trying to build a business out of her infamy. And it'll fail, I said. Not because I'm vindictive, but because the market for wellness advice from people who announce affairs at work parties is probably pretty limited. We raised our glasses again, this time to the beautiful, messy, occasionally ridiculous nature of consequences. To the fact that sometimes good guys don't finish last. They just finish with better lawyers, bigger bank accounts, and the satisfaction of knowing they did everything right even when everything felt wrong. You ever going to date again? Mark asked as we were finishing the bottle. Eventually, I said, when I meet someone who doesn't think workplace affairs are suitable party announcements. That's a pretty low bar. After Clara, I'm comfortable with low bars. At least for now. Whiskers meowed in agreement, or possibly hunger, and I realized something. I was genuinely okay. Not just surviving or coping or getting through it, but actually okay. Clara had tried to destroy me publicly, and instead she'd freed me from a marriage I hadn't realized was already over. She'd given me back control of my life, my career, and my future. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just living well, posting good numbers, and watching your ex try to teach yoga to people who definitely recognize her from viral videos. Closure was overrated. Quarterly reports were forever. Hashtag Chapter 10, peace, profits, and perfect timing. 9 months after the Christmas party that changed everything, I stood on the balcony of my new penthouse apartment, watching Nashville's city lights flicker like applause stretched across the horizon. The apartment was objectively too big for one man and a cat, but after everything that had happened, I decided I deserved some unnecessary luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a kitchen I barely used, and a view that made every overpriced dollar worth it. Whiskers was inside, probably destroying something expensive, but I'd learned to pick my battles. She'd been with me through the worst of it, and if she wanted to sharpen her claws on furniture that cost more than my first car, she'd earned that right. The city looked different from up here. Cleaner, more organized, like someone had arranged all the chaos into neat little rows of light. From this height, you couldn't see the mess, the traffic jams, the arguments, the people making terrible decisions in real time. You just saw the glow, the potential, the promise that tomorrow might be better than today. Clara had completely vanished from Nashville's corporate circles, which was probably for the best. According to the internet, because the internet never fully forgets anyone, she was still teaching yoga somewhere in the suburbs, still trying to build her wellness brand on the foundation of her own scandal. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that her classes were sparsely attended, mostly by people who didn't recognize her or didn't care about her past. The authenticity she'd been chasing had turned out to be remarkably unmarketable. I didn't feel bad for her. I didn't feel vindictive either. Mostly, I just felt distant. Like she was a character from a movie I'd watched years ago, barely remembered now except for the general plot. She'd been my wife, my partner, the person I'd thought I'd grow old with. Now she was just someone who'd made a series of catastrophically poor decisions and had to live with the consequences. Eli had apparently left Nashville entirely. Someone told me he'd moved to Portland or Seattle or one of those Pacific Northwest cities where people reinvent themselves and pretend their past doesn't exist. Good for him. I hoped he was happy blending smoothies or writing manifestos or whatever it is that disgraced marketing managers do when they need a fresh start. As for me, I'd built something that looked suspiciously like success from the rubble of my marriage. Miles Holdings was now a reality, a consulting and investment firm that specialized in helping businesses scale sustainably. I'd acquired 2 more fashion startups in the past 6 months, both showing promising growth. The architect who'd become a consultant had now become an entrepreneur, and honestly, it suited me better than I'd expected. The best part, the part that made me smile every time I thought about it, was the Mentorship Fund. I'd established it 3 months ago with Mark's help, a program that provided financial literacy resources and legal consultation for people going through divorces, especially those who'd been blindsided by infidelity. It was petty in the best possible way, taking my personal disaster and turning it into something that helped other people avoid similar catastrophes. The fund was called the Strategic Futures Initiative because the revenge fund for people who got screwed over by cheaters didn't have the same professional ring to it. We'd already helped 43 people protect their assets, understand their rights, and navigate divorces with better preparation than I'd had. Every success story felt like another small victory, another reminder that sometimes the best way to heal is to make sure others don't hurt the same way. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Board meeting tomorrow at 9. Also, you're trending again. Something about inspirational quotes. Check Twitter. I opened Twitter, my public account now, because I'd finally accepted that privacy was a relic of my past life, and saw what he meant. Someone had made one of those inspirational quote graphics using something I'd apparently said in an interview I'd forgotten about. The image showed my face looking thoughtful, with text overlaid that read, "They laughed when she called me just an appearance." Turns out, I was the whole show. Gavin Miles. It had 89,000 retweets and counting. The comments were predictably mixed. People calling it inspirational, people calling it petty, people debating whether it was healthy to quote yourself, and people just enjoying the ongoing saga of my life like it was their favorite TV show. I texted Mark back. "I sound like a fortune cookie wrote my biography." "A fortune cookie with excellent lawyers," he replied. "See you tomorrow." I pocketed my phone and looked back out at the city. Somewhere out there, Clara was probably teaching a yoga class, trying to help people find their center while still searching for her own. Somewhere out there, Eli was probably regretting every decision that had led him to a viral video and a ruined career. And somewhere out there, 50 people who'd laughed at my humiliation were probably telling the story of the Christmas party. Except now they were the cautionary tale, and I was the punchline that actually landed. The irony wasn't lost on me. 9 months ago, I'd been the joke, the husband who got publicly humiliated at a holiday party, the guy everyone pitted or laughed at depending on their capacity for empathy. Now I was the success story, the example, the guy who turned personal disaster into professional triumph. It wasn't the story I would have chosen to live, but it was the story I'd been given, and I'd made damn sure it had a good ending. Inside, Whiskers meowed, probably demanding dinner or attention or just reminding me that cats don't care about redemption arcs. I went back in, poured her food, and made myself a drink. Whiskey, the good stuff. Because I could afford the good stuff now, and that felt important somehow. My apartment was quiet except for the sound of Whiskers eating and the distant hum of the city below. No drama, no chaos, no surprise announcements at work parties. Just peace, the kind that comes from knowing you survived something that should have destroyed you and came out stronger on the other side. I thought about that night sometimes, standing in that trendy loft with my champagne, watching my marriage end in real time while strangers laughed. I thought about how small I'd felt, how humiliated, how certain that this was the worst moment of my life. And it had been, technically. It was the moment everything I thought I knew about my life turned out to be wrong. But it was also the moment everything changed. The moment I stopped being passive and started being strategic. The moment I remembered that I wasn't just someone's husband or someone's embarrassment. I was Gavin Miles, and I'd built things before and could build them again. 3 days after that party, the people who'd laughed lost their jobs. The woman who'd mocked me lost everything she'd taken for granted. And the man who'd smiled and walked out came back with documentation, preparation, and the kind of patience that only comes from knowing exactly how the story ends. I raised my glass to the city, to the journey, to the beautiful disaster that had somehow become my greatest success. They laughed when she called me just an appearance. I said out loud, feeling only slightly ridiculous talking to myself in an empty apartment. Turns out, I was the whole show. Whiskers looked at me like I was being dramatic, which was fair, but she also rubbed against my leg, which I chose to interpret as support. The city lights flickered on below me, thousands of stories unfolding simultaneously. Romances beginning, marriages ending, careers launching, dreams crashing. Somewhere in all that chaos, my story had become part of the landscape, a cautionary tale about karma, consequences, and the importance of reading investment contracts carefully. I finished my drink, scratched Whiskers behind the ears, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Genuinely excited about tomorrow. Not because I had revenge to plan or battles to fight, but because I had things to build, people to help, and a life that was finally, completely mine. The show wasn't over. It was just getting started, and this time, I was writing the script.